Welcome to the 2020 Midwest Energy Policy Series on energy efficiency. The program will begin in just a few minutes. You may ask questions during any of the sessions using the Q&A box, and you may send messages to the panelists using the chat function. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Josh Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Energy Initiative. I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 edition of the Midwest Energy Policy Series on energy efficiency. If you weren't able to join us yesterday, thank you for joining us today. And if you were able to join us yesterday, thanks for returning. As I said yesterday, after canceling our April event, our board felt we could try a new way. So this is our first attempt at a virtual Midwest Energy Policy Series. So we appreciate all your patience, but most importantly, we appreciate your participation. We have a great lineup today of three great sessions that I think will really interest you, and they tie well together. They are on advanced metering infrastructure, the impact on energy efficiency, the rural energy efficiency gap, as well as time of use rates. If you have any questions at the bottom of your screen, you can click on the chat or the Q&A buttons, and that will direct you to our panelists, to myself or Travis, and we will get those questions answered during the Q&A period. This is being recorded and it will be available on demand to participants following this. If for some reason you're having a problem with Zoom, you can go to YouTube and see this live streamed. There was a link provided to you for the YouTube live stream in your registration documents. And I think it would and should go without saying that we couldn't do this event without the MEI board, and more specifically our sponsors. It takes special sponsors to continue their support from an in-person event, which we know has a variety of different values for all of you versus online, which reduces some of that. We do hope that the content is worthwhile for you, but thank you very much to our diamond sponsors, Evergy and Polsinelli, and to our gold sponsor, Ameren Missouri, as well as our silver sponsors, Liberty Utilities and Spire. Also like to thank our bronze sponsor, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and also our partners, the Missourians for a Balanced Energy Future and the Building Performance Association. Without these partners and sponsors, this event definitely would not have happened. We're very pleased to be able to we have more participants in this year's conference than we did last year. And so we hope that we continue to move in that direction. But in general, like I said, we have an exciting first session for you today. A little technical, but also I think it really feeds into everything else that we talked about yesterday and the other two sessions today, and that's advanced metering, AMIs. Very pleased to bring both Julie with Oracle Utilities and Jeffrey with Ameren to share with you their different perspectives as a utility and a contractor, local as well as national. So they're going to be in your perspective. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. But with that, I will hand the reins over to Julia, and she will share with you what her and Oracle are up to. Thank you, Julia.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Josh and Travis and everyone at MEI and on the board for having me today. This is a topic we love talking about, and so hope everyone who's dialed in is doing okay post storms and in light of everything that's going on in the world. So as Josh said, my name is Julia Friedman. I am on the regulatory affairs team at OPower. OPower is part of Oracle Utilities. And we provide utilities with data analytics, customer engagement, and behavior change solutions. So my goal today is to take you through some use cases for AMI and ultimately demonstrate that it's not the AMI data on its own that is going to get you energy efficiency or other outcomes. It's having the right tools and actionable insights delivered to customers that will get you to where you want to go. So it's a little bit of a smorgasbord. It's certainly not everything you can do with AMI, but we'll give you a flavor of how the data is used. So next slide. This is just kind of the agenda we'll go through. I'll do a little bit more to frame things and then take you through 3 use cases on proactive alerts, using a peak management example to show you what program adoption at scale looks like. And we'll talk a little bit about how disaggregated energy insights are used, and then see how all of it comes together for a more complex customer type. Next slide. So ACEEE earlier this year put out a report talking about AMI deployments and the benefits of AMI data. And we couldn't agree more with the sentiment expressed by one of the authors, Rachel Gold, especially where she says AMI data needs to be paired with customer engagement tools. We're going to leave the pricing strategies to people way smarter than us, to actually design a TOU rate, for example. Our expertise comes in with these customer engagement tools, and we really do believe that's what a lot of the outcomes, whether you're looking for customer satisfaction or energy savings or demand reduction, hinges on. So next slide. So this is kind of where we play in terms of using AMI data across time and for different objectives. And we're not going to go into every single one of these, but I think what's important here is to understand that in whatever you want to do here, whether it's delivering energy efficiency or getting customers to sign up for variable rates, or even having a customer say, yes, you can control this device in my home, and then I want to be hands off. Every one of those decisions requires a customer to say, like, I understand what's happening, and yes, I'm going to take this action, or yes, you can, or I can sign up for this program and you can control these things for me. So yeah, regardless of where you might fall with what you want to do on the spectrum, customer understanding and action is key. So let's move on to the use cases, and we will dive right in. Next slide to the proactive alerts. So high bill alerts are one form of proactive alerts. And what are we solving for here? So for any given utility, about 40% of customers will receive a high bill, something that's higher than their normal for that month and unexpected. And that leads to, high call volumes to the call center. Certainly the customer's not satisfied, and they probably aren't going to be jumping and chomping at the bit to engage in other programs. So the other thing we're solving for is the fact that customers have come to expect high bill alerts due to what's happened in other industries. And so they expect their utility to be communicating to them in that way. Think about your phone plan. If you are coming up on your data limit, you're going to get a notification from your cell phone provider. So it's an expectation of customers. It's a bad experience if they get the high bill. And so what can we do about it? We can send high bill alerts, and certainly we can do this without AMI data. But I think the example you see here really shows how much more powerful it is if you have hourly or even 15-minute interval data, right? You can see that we can tell a customer when they're using the most energy. And then, of course, we'll also surface energy efficiency tips related to usage during what is their highest usage time. So I think it's also a good time to call out that high bill alerts have skyrocketed. So these are not things that will automatically generate every month. And truthfully, hopefully they don't. Hopefully customers are not on track for high bills. But with everyone staying at home in the pandemic, obviously residential home energy use has gone up a lot. And we have generated, just in that first month of the pandemic, that we saw over 400% increase in the number of high bill alerts that we generated. And so it's more important than ever to, as customers are adjusting to these new patterns and new lifestyles, to be communicating with them and show them that you want to help them manage their energy use. So that's use case number one, pretty straightforward. We'll move on to the next use case, which requires a little bit more setup. Okay, so right now across the US, we only have about 14% of residential customers who are enrolled in a demand response program. And most of that's going to be with your traditional direct load control kinds of programs. So we believe that every household through behavioral demand response can be a demand response resource. So unlike high bill alerts, in order to have a behavioral demand response program, you have to have AMI. So what is this broadly? Very broadly speaking, it's using behavioral insights to get customers to reduce their energy consumption during a peak period. So most often that's going to be a really hot summer day in the afternoon and evening hours. And like any demand response, unlike other demand response programs, there's no hardware. This is purely through behavioral insights that are sent to them with outbound communications. We have two flavors of behavioral demand response. One is strictly sending out communications. So there's no price incentive. They're not getting a rebate or a credit on their bill or anything. And we do see about 1% to 3% peak savings without any sort of price signal to the customer. And we can deliver these programs at 1/3 the cost of direct load control. Then we have a peak rebate type program. And so when you do add that rebate or bill credit to the offering, you see peak savings increase by 2 to 3 times over what you would get with a strict behavioral demand response program. And I would say customers like both experiences. Obviously getting money sweetens the pot a little bit. So they really love the peak time rebate programs. So the way it works is ahead of the event, customers will get the communication saying, hey, get ready, we're going to call, we're going to have a high use day, so we need you to reduce your usage between these hours. Here are some ways you can do that. And then after the event, we're also going to communicate to the customer and let them know how they did. Okay, so next slide. So where does AMI come in? We need to know who is, while anyone could be a good target for this program, there are probably some customers who could really perform well. And so if we want, in this example, to get customers to sign up for ComEd's Peak Time Savings Program, we want to know who has the highest potential to save during their peak hours. And so high potential to save generally corresponds with high usage during that peak period. And so we can use a customer segmentation tree and AMI data to identify which customers have a load profile that matches this peak time savings program and the way it's constructed. So once we know who they are, we can then start sending them communications proactively to invite them to join the program. So that's one way we can use AMI data. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we're also using AMI data in that feedback to customers. And so we're letting them know based on the change in their usage. And this communication comes just a day after the actual event. So it's very quick feedback. And we're using AMI data to tell them how much they saved, how they did compared to their neighbors and other people who participated in the program. And again, kind of providing the feedback they need so that they want to do better and continuously participate in these peak time savings programs. And what's great is we do see, it's this structure of providing feedback that we do see households showing up event after event across a whole summer season and from year to year. And then I included this tweet from someone in the BGE program at Baltimore Gas and Electric. I don't know that he would be an influencer. I think it got one like, but it's kind of cool in that, number one, someone's tweeting something positive at their utility and they're communicating what they learned using AMI data back to their, legions of followers and their utility, right? They know that they were able to earn $12 and that they reference the energy savings day. So we think that's pretty great. Okay, last use case, next slide. So one of the, I feel like, hot topics with AMI data and with behavioral energy efficiency programs and pretty much everything else these days is disaggregated energy insights. And so there's a lot here you can see that we can affect with disaggregated energy insights. The example here is really helping someone identify, what is an appliance that's driving a disproportionately high portion of your energy bill, and then pairing that with a program that will address that specific appliance. And so I should back up and say disaggregation is the ability to take the whole home profile for usage and break it apart into some of the appliances or other in-home heating and cooling systems and see how much each is contributing and when to the overall usage. And so giving customers these more granular insights and pairing that with an energy efficiency program could be very powerful. We're actually running some tests to figure out if that's 100% a true statement. We know that customers do get a little bit confused and are a little skeptical with disaggregation. They don't understand how a utility knows that that's what's going on in their home. So it is important to, and what you don't see here with the communication is provide them with some additional context. You want to make sure that you hold that customer's trust, and that's vital to getting them to take an action. So, okay, let's see how all this comes together with a complex customer. So next slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. So let's look at Theo. So Theo's an EV owner, and we are going to use energy disaggregation to identify that he's an EV owner. We can tell based on the load profile of his home that he's probably got an EV. And like I was saying, the creepy factor can be a real thing. And so we often recommend that for using disaggregated energy insights, you might want to confirm with the customer, say, we noticed this thing is happening. Can you confirm that you are an EV owner? If we have data files or other, he's on an EV rate already, then we know he's an EV owner. But if you're trying to just detect who in your territory is an EV owner, who you don't have that data for, use disaggregated energy insights, pair it with confirmation. And that also helps draw him in to the rest of the experience, right? So he'll then start receiving home energy reports, which is our sort of flagship energy efficiency tool, letting him know how his home energy usage compares to neighbors, and we'll break out that EV portion of it, because of course he's going to have higher usage than similar homes in his area if he has an EV, and we need to acknowledge that and communicate it back to him, showing him which portion is your electric vehicle charging and which portion is the rest of your home. We might also use the home energy report or another channel to promote an EV rate to him if he's not on that. And then we can start getting him to charge and shift his load if that's an objective, and overall give him a much better experience that recognizes him as an EV owner. And all of that is possible with AMI data. So that's pretty much all I've got. And thank you for having me again. And I know you're gonna hear from Jeff what Ameren's doing, and I think it's really exciting. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Julia. Obviously, we're going from the much larger scope contractor to seeing what's going on in our own backyard. So with that, Jeff, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody at MEI and everybody out there for having me today. My name is Jeff Esserman. I oversee the smart meter deployment and implementation for Ameren, Missouri. And I'm really excited to talk to you about our pathway to customer engagement. As you heard from Julia, what's awesome is where the technology marketplace is today in this space, because as we are starting essentially our journey in leveraging this technology, there are so many things that we can take advantage of in the industry in terms of delivering this to customers. So we're excited about that. I look forward to sharing with you a little bit as to where we are at Ameren, Missouri, and our pathway forward. Next slide. So just briefly to go over where we are with the program, we're really excited. We've been on about an 18-month build to get our systems and infrastructure ready as part of our smart energy plan to begin deployment. And we just launched in July the deployment of our smart meter program. So at Ameren, Missouri, we really were on the leading edge of essentially core automated meter reading, but our AMR meter reading system is really at the end of its useful life. It's been out there for about 25 years. And so we're initiating our smart meter deployment, and we're really excited about that. We've thus far put about 15,000 meters out there. We've got a long way to go. The program is scheduled to last right now through 2025, but with the efficiencies that we think we can get within the framework of our regulatory structure, we're going to look to actually get that done maybe by 2024. We're trying to put plans together to be a little bit more aggressive. And then, one of the great opportunities for us is recently with all of our stakeholders, we've kind of worked through establishing some new time of use rate programs that'll be brand new for Ameren Missouri customers. Later in the day, counterpart Steve Wills is going to talk about those programs specifically. They're really exciting for us, but I think they should be most exciting for our customers. And so I'll talk to you a little bit more about why. And then, we're right now starting our deployment kind of in that St. Charles area. There's a real diverse landscape there in terms of some rural, some urban. There's commercial customers. There's residential customers. And all of those early learnings are really going to help us in the energy efficiency space as well. We really look forward to understanding our customers at a different level with AMI data. And as Julia pointed out, the art of the possible with AMI and kind of how we engage the marketplace in the future is just an awesome opportunity. Next slide. So one thing in Ameren, Missouri that is, really important to us is, we research with our customers. I think, we have a couple of avenues. We will do formal research in terms of, online focus groups or actual focus groups when you can do that. We have an online panel of over 3,000 customers. And so what's really important is to talk to customers and understand their preferences. And for Ameren, Missouri customers, as we migrate to AMI technology and you think about the impact it could have in the energy efficiency space, our customers are kind of at a, baseline level of this type of engagement. And so we see AMI as an opportunity to really unlock some of these choices and empowerment for our customers. And as it states here, that they really want to be empowered to make energy decisions. They can be in somewhat of a commoditized relationship with us right now. And we want to kind of decommoditize that. We want them to understand their behaviors and what they can do to change their relationship in the energy space. They're craving tips. They tell us all the time, they want to know how to empower themselves. They'll embrace new technology. They want to engage that, but it has to lead to a reward. They really want to know what's in it for them. And they want to understand what that pathway is. They're willing to change behaviors, whether that be a new rate option, a demand program, whatever that looks like, as long as the reward is there for them as a customer. And they're really excited about smart meters in general. Some of the other benefits in terms of data availability, as Julia pointed out, there could be new alerts programs, there could be different offerings that are going to add value to them in their entire relationship with us. Next slide. So if you think about, there are two essential propositions, right? I mean, so right now, the technology that we have is really dated and it's costly to maintain. But we see, lower cost of service as a huge benefit for smart meter technology, reducing truck rolls, looking at efficiencies, things of that nature. But the bottom part, really providing energy choices. We really see a dynamic opportunity there. And we're, depending on the utility strategy, I've done some research in how things have rolled out. Sometimes that might be a little delayed, maybe after. And what we're doing at Ameren, Missouri is essentially in a very short window, we're going to start introducing, new choices and rates and options for customers that could fit their lifestyles. As Julia pointed out, the technology around web tools to create that engagement has significantly matured in the marketplace. And we're going to be launching over the next year some really great tools. We see support of the energy efficiency programs that are out there and maybe, supporting our team in creating even new programs that could highlight, new options for customers. Enabling renewables, smart meters come out with net metering capability kind of built in. So we're excited about what that means for our customers. And then it has to come through effective communication. I think when you think about the baseline of where customers are, we really have to kind of ladder them through an experience. I think it starts with building awareness in their behaviors today, getting them to understand how they use energy. When you think about what Julia brought up, just even the new, kind of COVID-19 situation, I'm sure customers have a whole new set of behaviors, right? Whether those are going to become normal or they're anomalies, they can start understanding their behaviors and how it relates to cost. And I think at Ameren Missouri, we really want to focus on how do we educate our customers well about their behaviors and what the impact could be in the energy efficiency space. Next slide. So the path from smart meters to energy efficiency with us, really is, it's important to leverage the data. As Julia pointed out, the data takes you so far, but it's an important part of the process, right? I think it starts with insights that support new levels of engagement with customers, making sure that the one thing we learned in research is not only is the availability of the information important, but how customers can actually take action on any of their options and choices needs to be convenient. So they want to, build awareness, but they want convenience in how they make these choices. And then certainly, how we leverage AMI data and grid operations and everyday efficiency opportunities is awesome. You got to enhance it with tools, as Julia pointed out, making sure that you've got the right engagement tools in place, looking at things like usage comparisons, rate comparisons, rebates and incentives, those types of things. We're going to be looking at where down the road does demand response come into play. We have some existing thermostat and appliance opportunities, but our AMI data will hopefully engage customers differently to look at what they might be able to take advantage of. And then, certainly the customer experience is huge, right? So you got to make sure that it's part of an overall experience. We need to make all these experiences convenient. The one thing customers consistently told us is they don't want to spend a lot of time having to overthink things, right? These tools need to present, the insights and information and actionability to customers in a very convenient way. And we're going to be looking to, the journey that Julia talked about, that's a journey that we want to make easy to activate for our customers through our smart meter program. Next slide. So in kind of encapsulating this and summarizing, we work with Accenture as our system integrator, and they have been a great partner in bringing insights from around the industry to kind of help us, look for opportunities to realize the AMI technology and its value in the overall energy marketplace. And so, what we see is this, connected world opportunity. But, smart meters are going to be kind of that, initial enabler of where the data and insights can come to activate on this type of opportunity with customers. And so, as DERs become more prominent and EVs, as the example Julia highlighted, we want to make it easy for customers to understand, the back end part of that, which is their energy relationship with us at Ameren Missouri. Because if they understand that and they understand how they use energy and how, the smart meter technology can be of value to them, well, then it takes some of the mystery out of activating some of these grid of the future options. And so I think in the customer journey, we're going to strive to make that both convenient and accessible to customers. And when you talk about all types of customer segments, you think about it from, we do at Ameren Missouri, think about it from all of our customer types as well. And that includes, low income customers. For example, there could be folks that, need to understand their behaviors to be able to take advantage of efficiency opportunities to realize some of those cost savings. And I know, Bill Davis and our energy efficiency team have specifically looked to address those things. And we see the AMI data as just an enabler of this marketplace. So really that, I think that's the last slide, Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think, at Ameren Missouri, we're just simply excited about, the art of the possible. And as Julia shared, and I hope what I'm sharing here is that customer engagement is just going to be critical to making that experience an awesome one for customers, but it also can provide a lot of value in the future. That's how we're looking at it at Ameren Missouri. We see plugging, smart meter technology into our overall smart energy plan is just going to be a win, both internally and externally for our customers. So thank you for allowing me the time to share where we are with this. And with that, I will turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was very interesting. Good to know we have so many things going on here in our own backyard as well. So for everyone attending, now is the time to go ahead and send in your questions if you haven't already. I do have a few that I'd like to pass on. And I was wondering if both of you could talk about how AMIs interact with the rental community. We had a presentation yesterday about the impact energy efficiency can have for property owners and tenants in the rental community. Can you speak a little bit to how AMIs either will help solve the difficulty that we have in the rental community with energy efficiency, or if that's not the case and it's not going to have any impact, that's fine as well. Julie, I'd let you go ahead and start, and we'll go to Jeff.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think what's important, I would say a short answer, yes, AMI data still benefits those who are renters. So I think there are two ways. One, and we work in the residential space, but certainly AMI data from a building perspective can help the landlord and building owner understand their usage. So that would fall into like probably for the common spaces at least, more of a commercial energy efficiency or demand response provider. But for the customer themselves, where the status of a renter comes in is in what ultimately gets communicated. And so we'll understand that if they're a renter, they're not going to have the ability to like switch out, their big appliances. And so it's the tips that we're going to give them they'll still be able to benefit from seeing their hourly and daily energy usage. And so it still gives them more control over their energy bills. It's just the actions that we're recommending to them will reflect their status as a renter rather than an owner. But in terms of energy management, absolutely. I would also say, we know we're working with Baltimore Gas and Electric on a pilot and some other Exelon opcos in Maryland on time of use rates. And I think one of the presenters yesterday was talking about how there's a higher overlap of low and moderate income customers with the rental population. And so we are seeing part of that pilot is to look at how low and moderate income customers do on a TOU rate. And the anticipation was that, okay, this is going to be a hard customer segment to recruit to the rate. And it was the customer segment that signed up fastest, was the LMI customer segment. So not everyone there is going to be a renter, but I thought that was surprising to me, and we'll see with the pilot. Ultimately, it's in its first year of 2 years how things shake out, but I'm really glad that they're studying it, and that for the low and moderate income populations, whether it's rental or not, they're looking for ways to save, and TOU rates enabled by AMI provides them as much opportunity as others. That was a very long, winding answer. Jeff can probably do a better job being more concise.
That's right. Jeff?
Yeah, no, it was a great answer. I mean, I think, my perspective on it is, in the rental community, when I listened yesterday, it was really great to see, the data on the profitability of energy efficiency in the rental community, right? And so the win-win to me is getting, property management to understand, the impacts. And I think AMI data can be a real nice tool in the toolbox for that, along with the applications that are out there for them to understand cost comparisons and what products and services and efficiency programs make sense. And then that win-win translates to the renters, right? I mean, in lower overall energy costs, and honestly, the hope is that it, becomes kind of an autopilot situation for the rental community where, the win at the, property owner level becomes a win for all of our customers. And as Julia pointed out, an important segment for us to consider as well. So I just see it. I talked about laddering customers. I think we're going to have to ladder property managers along, and I think the data will be very useful. What you see in the commercial customer community, AMI data can then translate to, the property owners, and it's probably our job as utilities to highlight the benefits.
And that makes sense. I was going to talk about commercial. For those who aren't aware, a lot of your examples for AMI were on the residential side. Can you talk a little bit about the difference for how this type of data or infrastructure works for commercial properties and their energy efficiency management?
Yeah, I mean, so from our perspective, we do behavioral programs have traditionally been focused on the residential sector, and the commercial sector, at least in OPower's early days, we found that the commercial sector is like very sensitive. So for instance, trying to communicate and affect behavior change within, let's say, like the salon industry, when trying to communicate that to who we identified as salon owners, there was a lot of feedback about, I'm a barber shop, I'm not a salon, and like some differences. And businesses, I think in general, are harder to classify perhaps than residential segments. But there certainly are solutions in terms of being able to show commercial owners, what their energy daily and over time looks like, and provide them with management tools. So that's not core to what OPower is doing. We do have partners we're working with, but it is a challenging sector to work with, and yeah, very sensitive.
Jeff, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting in this space is, a lot of what I consider large commercial, that segment, they're ahead of the curve in a lot of ways in terms of their approach in energy management, right? And decarbonization and those types of things. I'm really excited, about kind of that mid-tier, those folks that don't have the engagement today, but have a huge opportunity to understand, their energy behaviors and where some of those wins are. And I think for us at Ameren Missouri, the opportunity really exists to highlight, through the data analytics and opportunities with that mid-tier. What we see is I think our large commercial accounts and key accounts, they're very actively engaged, right? But I think there's a real nice opportunity in the mid-tier for us to kind of highlight and promote both the data and the efficiency areas.
Okay. Very interesting. That's good to know. We do have a question in, and it's about net metering. Can you talk about how AMI works with net metering for rooftop solar for customers? Jeff, I'll let you start.
Sure. I mean, I can jump in on that. Today, it takes a special meter. We have to go out and actually do something physical to, allow for the net metering customer and rooftop solar customer to engage that relationship with Ameren Missouri. New smart meter technology, that is programmatically inherent to the meter. So the enabler there is just going to be, the meter will not be any sort of a hindrance in any way to enable, that relationship with our customer. So we're really excited about that. In addition, that data, then will be part of our data presentment capabilities, and we can kind of work through. I'm not an expert on all, the future of the programs. I think Steve Wills, who will be talking a little bit later, really understands how the programs could work. but the technology itself will be inherent to the meter, and we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I would add, actually, it was one of the complex customer examples I originally had in my deck was a solar customer. And I took it out because I was worried about time, but it's a similar kind of need that we see with the EV customer, right? So if someone has solar on their rooftop, we need to acknowledge that. And then we need to drive home. I think there's a thought among some solar customers of like, I've done this huge thing, I've made this huge investment, I'm good. And you know, we want to communicate to customers that efficiency, there are still efficiency opportunities to really help you make the most of your solar energy. So in terms of energy management, what they would see, you know, in an online energy management portal, we can show net production and then ultimately net consumption where it exists to help customers kind of understand how all these choices go together. And it's something at OPower we've studied a lot because the solar customers can be very expensive for utilities to serve. There isn't a great understanding how all of it comes together and why they still have bill even sometimes. And so we have developed a customer journey for solar customers as well that will acknowledge their status and kind of separate in the way we have for an EV customer, separate their solar production with from their net consumption in their home.
All right, fantastic. We did have a question in, and it was to you, Jeff. For program allies who perform energy audits, who need historical data on large buildings, how many years of hourly data will be available, or will we be able to get from Ameren? And how many years of monthly data?
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry, Josh. Yeah. So we're looking at this point, probably 2 years. You know, the interval data is going to be a huge data set. And so managing, you know, that we're kind of looking at how much data we can store. We're probably going to be maneuvering over to kind of cloud-based services to look at our AMI data as appropriate. But at this point, the plan would be 2 years.
Okay. Just our last opportunity here for questions. And this may go mostly to Jeff, but Julie, you may have some thoughts here. A lot of the conversations and notes that you had were the impact to the customer on that front end. What do you see the value proposition for the utilities on the back end, on the system side, that AMIs would provide to the utility?
Yeah, you know, for us, I really think, you know, the grid analytics are a real opportunity for us in leveraging the smart meter technology. So one thing that we are going to start tracking through smart meter technology are things like momentary, you know, outages or things where we might have slight disruptions. It's going to be, you know, a significant amount of data, and we're going to have to look at that. But we hope that that's the type of analytics where we can get some grid health reads that might be different than we get today. In addition, you know, all of the way that, you know, the system works today in terms of, you know, outage response. I mean, this week, you know, certainly we had a very real, you know, situation with storms in our area. And we hope the transfer of data and communications, which is going to be much more robust, is really going to help us in those situations too, you know how to deploy resources a little bit more effectively. So we see a couple of avenues on the back end, you know, where, you know, I think the analytics around that are also evolving. But those are two areas where, you know, we're going to start looking at data a little bit differently and try and bear results on the operating side. In addition, you know, we have remote connect and disconnect capabilities. So there's efficiencies in, you know, being able to have, you know, customers move in and move out of properties and that sort of thing. So there are several different areas where the smart meter technology will benefit, the operating side of the business as well. And then lastly with that, again, the cost of managing, the existing infrastructure and meter system greatly gets reduced, over time by leveraging, the AMI pieces. So.
Yeah, I would just add for a program manager perspective, having great data visualization tools is really helpful. So like knowing where EVs are on your system and when they're charging. If you think about, we're working with a couple of clients to help them think through, okay, these certain nodes on their system are congested and possibly need some upgrades. Is there targeted energy efficiency that we could do? And then which customers have, the load profiles that are most beneficial? And so helping in order to reduce the load on that node. And so there's, I think, a lot of potential in this space to connect some of these behind the meter solutions and surface like what's going on behind the meter to the utility to better take advantage of them to manage the grid.
All right. There was one, this will be our last question. And it's a simple one. Is there an off switch for customers?
Like an opt out?
That's what I would imagine. Off switch, yeah. I would think opt out if someone doesn't want their data shared or thing like that. How do
There
you
is, yeah. I mean, for Ameren Missouri, there is what we're calling it a non-standard meter program, but there is a cost to it for customers, but they can opt out. And then, what we have to do is we'll manually read those meters. But our hope is that, since we're already on an automated meter reading system, that communication already exists, we'll have really high adoption, but there's an off switch per se, an opt out program.
Julie, are you seeing anything around this particular topic, opt outs, off switch, non-compliance? And I don't think she is. So with that, I would, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. Julia, if you're on or off somewhere in the ether, thank you for joining us as well. That will conclude our session on advanced metering sessions. So thank you very much. Our next session coming up is on rural energy efficiency, the rural energy efficiency gap. We'll talk to you soon about that.
Energy impacts everything we do. It doesn't matter, if you aren't in the energy field, you use energy every day.
Well, consumers are really interested in a number of different things. They want choices. They want to be able to have energy at an affordable cost, and they want to make sure that it's reliable and efficient.
So long as you have that reliable energy, it's not really very costly, people don't really think much about it. But really there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Become part of Missouri's energy solution. Visit moenergy.org.
All right, our next session is on the rural energy efficiency gap. This, like a lot of the topics that we discuss at the policy series, is something that MEI is definitely interested in supporting. While we may not be the tip of the spear, I know as an example, when we look at facilitating ways to engage rural Missouri on energy efficiency, whether it's through policy or programs, or through the Show Me Pace program to be able to help finance these programs or projects. We definitely see a need and are very excited about and appreciative of the partners that we have here today to speak to you about this particular issue, help explain it, understand it, as well as what we're already doing right here in Missouri and what other folks are doing around the country to address this particular issue. So our first speaker this morning is Mary with the American Council on Energy Efficiency, Energy Efficient Economy. And then following Mary will be Emma with the, Island Institute, and Aaron with the Como Electric Cooperative. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with Mary. Thank you very much for joining us. And I believe Emma and Mary are going to work together on this. So
Yes.
Thank you both very much for joining, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Josh. Just confirming that you can hear me okay right now?
Yes, hear you. Yes.
Great. Thanks so much. And you'll be advancing the slides?
We will, yes.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I am Mary Shoemaker, and I work at a nonprofit called the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as ACEEE. I'm co-presenting today with Emma Wendt from the Island Institute, so we'll be alternating delivering slides and then can jointly answer questions at the end. Our goal with our presentation is really to set the stage and describe how energy efficiency can be used as a tool for enhancing rural prosperity. Next slide, please. So before we get into the presentation, I thought it might be helpful if we introduced ourselves a bit further. ACEEE is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and this year marks our 40th anniversary. I'm on our state policy program, and my focus is conducting research on state energy efficiency policies and also leading our work in rural communities. Our rural energy initiative really has 3 prongs. The first is conducting research. The second is convening stakeholders, whether state policymakers, utilities, or advocates. And the third is conducting technical assistance to these partners who are working on the ground. Next slide, please.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Just a sound check. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm based in Rockland, Maine, which is a small city of about 7,000 people. I grew up in a rural area in Nova Scotia, but in between I've lived in various cities along 2 coasts of North America and in Michigan too, so I've had some experience in the Midwest. At the Island Institute, I lead our climate pilots team, which evolved partly from our energy work. My background's in a broad range of energy and sustainability topics, from renewable energy project development to running corporate social responsibility programs in large organizations to supporting leadership development among professionals in this field. The Island Institute, where I work, is a community development nonprofit, and we're almost 40 years old. And we work to sustain Maine's island and coastal communities. So put another way, we work with resilient leaders to support thriving communities as they confront a changing world. We've had an energy team that has worked with Maine Island and coastal residents over the past many years, and we've provided technical assistance and community support to help bridge this energy gap for communities where we work. So this morning, we're going to start by adding some color to the energy challenges in rural communities. Then we'll look at how tailored and targeted energy efficiency efforts can be an effective solution to these issues. And we'll do so by telling some stories and offering some case studies. Next, please. And next. So imagine it's a cold winter night. Close your eyes if it helps to forget summer for a moment. And you're sitting at your table, trying to enjoy a cup of tea or hot chocolate. The bitter wind is howling and you can feel it come right through your windows, the floors, and the cracks in your wall. This was Doug Boynton's experience in his house, and that for many other people in their homes in rural America. Doug's a lobsterman and a contractor who lives year-round on Manhegan Island, which is 12 miles off the coast of Maine. He and his wife live on a high point on the island where the winter wind just whips through their house. They had trouble keeping their home above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and they pay 70 cents a kilowatt hour and $5 a gallon for propane. But Doug could not get a spray foam insulation contractor to come to his home. Next, please. You might be asking, why should we care about energy efficiency in rural communities? Doug might just seem like one guy, and there can't be that many people living on islands, right? But across the US, Doug is not alone. 21% of people in the US live in rural areas. And perhaps more importantly, rural folks are often frontline communities facing significant climate impacts, economic shocks, especially like what we're dealing with right now, and other major challenges to daily life. These are people who often have less flexibility to move or change how they get around or how they heat their homes. And these are often folks with intersecting demographics and identities who experience vulnerabilities for other reasons, including low-income populations, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and people with differing abilities. It's a matter of equity to ensure that our energy efficiency programs work for everyone, including rural folks. Energy efficiency can also be one important piece of economic recovery, both in terms of lowering people's monthly bills, as well as providing training opportunities for good local jobs. So as we'll talk about this morning, both Mary and I and Aaron, people in rural areas have faced major barriers in accessing the benefits of energy efficiency. Many of the barriers have only worsened as rural folks, people of color, and those with low-income households have seen particularly disproportionate economic and health income impacts from COVID-19. All of you, utilities, policymakers, and advocates need to work to bridge this rural efficiency gap. As an added benefit, when you design policies and programs for those who need them the most, you often get better quality outcomes for others too. Next, please.
So one challenge that underlies both equity and economic stability is energy burdens. You can calculate an energy burden by dividing a household's annual energy costs by their annual income. A variety of drivers determine a household energy burden, including the physical structure of a building and the income of the residents. For example, if you have a really leaky home and you have a low income, then you're likely to have a high energy burden. It's also important to note that energy burdens have a variety of impacts on a person's life that are not all energy related. For one, they can result in high utility bills, but they can also lead to unsafe living conditions or even make a home less comfortable. I say all this to really drive home that energy burdens are not just an energy issue, but a quality of life issue. Next slide. ACEEE's research has found that rural communities often face higher energy burdens than their metropolitan counterparts. So on average, across the country, we found that rural energy burdens are about 4.4% on average, compared to 3.1% in metropolitan areas. As you can see in this green map to the left, these numbers vary by region, but we found the highest rural energy burdens in the East, South Central, New England, and Mid-Atlantic regions. In the orange bar chart on the right, you can see how rural energy burdens vary by specific demographic groups. For example, low-income households often face the highest energy burdens, followed by manufactured housing residents. While ACEE's data is regional, the Island Institute also did their own energy burden calculations at the state level in a handful of states, and they found that in Maine, the average energy burden is 8.8%, but for the unbridged coastal islands, it's up to 18%, which is staggering. Next slide. So you might be wondering, what can we do to alleviate energy burdens? As you guessed, we might say energy efficiency is a really important tool. Efficiency can drive long-term savings and can alleviate rural energy burdens up to 25%, or save households up to $400 per year. Efficiency also generates additional benefits by improving public health, creating local jobs, and increasing the comfort of homes, as I already mentioned. Just think how much more comfortable it is to spend your time in a home that is well sealed with a consistent temperature and good heating and cooling systems, especially in the dog days of summer or rough winter days. Next slide.
In 2018, the Island Institute and partner organizations released a report called Bridging the Rural Efficiency Gap. Based on in-depth research of northern New England states and Alaska, including extensive interviews with residents, we identified 3 buckets of broad types of barriers to accessing energy efficiency in rural communities. So they are, broadly speaking, geographic, financial, and awareness and access. Let's look a little bit more at each of those now. Next, please. Matinicus Isle, 20 miles off the coast of Maine, has 30 ferry runs per year. Residents often travel and bring in most supplies on a small 4 or 6-seater Cessna. And you can see the wheel of one of these Cessnas in the photo on the slide, in a flight that I took a few months ago to get to the island before COVID. Monhegan Island, where our friend Doug lives, 12 miles off the coast of Maine, has no car ferry at all to transport large vehicles or building materials. When we helped coordinate a weatherization week, which I'll talk about more later, they needed to charter a barge to transport the spray foam truck to the island at a discounted cost of $2,000. That's just to get the truck out, not even to start the work. They also had to get the timing right to coordinate with the tides. In Alaska, there's an even narrower window to arrange for barge traffic. They have about a 1 to 2 month long construction season to work around ice and other local challenges. Overall, low population density and challenging logistics, to say the least, means that contractors are often less likely to set up shop or even serve these communities at all. Next, please. So most of us sing the praises of the long-term financial benefits of energy efficiency, but in reality, it's still hard in practice for many rural residents to pay for these efficiency projects. That's in part because of the economic situation in rural households. In Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont counties, which we looked at, as a percentage of rural population increases, household income decreases. This effect could well exist in other states. We just looked at those in particular. And you'll see the energy burdens that Mary mentioned before. We've also seen significant challenges in terms of access to credit and debt aversion among rural folks. In Vermont, a survey from 2015 showed that 75% of people were unwilling to take on additional debt to finance efficiency project upgrades. So even if your state does have programs like on-bill financing or something similar, the interest rates can overshadow any energy savings and customers just might not be interested. Next, please. We see issues around awareness and access all the time when working with people in rural and remote communities. During COVID, we've all experienced just how essential broadband internet access is to connect to the world and go about our daily lives, including attending conferences. We've also begun to collectively realize that many, many people don't have or just can't get broadband at home. In Maine, excitingly, we recently passed a bond to fund expanded access across the state, but it will still take more time, more money, and community effort to get broadband internet to everyone. So it's a long way of saying that we can't only rely on traditional marketing to get folks to participate in energy efficiency programming. And even if your audience is able to see your ad or get to your website, many Mainers, for example, don't trust the utility to provide unbiased information. Next, please.
Now that we've explored some of the key challenges to rural efficiency, we also want to talk about solutions to overcoming those challenges and offer a few case studies of states and utilities and program administrators that have done so. So over the next few slides, we'll offer recommendations for all of these stakeholders for better serving rural customers. Next slide. First, I'd like to share 3 solutions for overcoming geographic barriers. One option is for states to pass supportive policies to drive energy efficiency investments in rural areas. As an example, Minnesota has a program called the Conservation Improvement Program, and it's actually an energy efficiency resource standard policy. So it sets energy efficiency spending and energy savings targets for rural electric co-ops, municipal utilities, and investor-owned utilities. I'm currently doing research on this topic and would love to hear from any of you who have ideas on other state policy examples worth exploring. A second idea is for utilities and program administrators to aggregate program administration responsibilities. Looking again at Minnesota, we see a lot of generation and transmission co-ops and municipal utility associations delivering efficiency programs on behalf of their members. And this really enables the members of those smaller utilities to access the benefits of efficiency, even if their smaller utility doesn't have the capacity to administer the programs themselves. The last solution I'll offer here is to consider workforce development needs. Just kind of as an anecdote to drive home how challenging this can be in rural areas, Efficiency Maine keeps a map of contractors certified to deliver efficiency programs across the state. But when you look at the map within a 100-mile radius of Presque Isle, which is the largest town in northern Maine, there are only 2 certified air sealing contractors. And they might, so even if you can find one of these contractors, they might charge an extra fee for the long travel, or they might not show up at all. So to address these workforce skill gaps, it's important for utilities and program administrators to partner with industry and also to leverage existing training programs wherever they might exist. But I think one really important consideration here is that workforce needs will vary widely by jurisdiction. So it's important to consider local circumstances when you explore training program opportunities. Next slide. So now I'll offer 2 solutions for financial barriers. First, many state regulators set performance incentives in order to get utilities and efficiency program administrators to meet certain program goals. We're seeing that some states include targets to serve rural customers more effectively, and then they reward their utilities or statewide administrators based on meeting those goals. So to drive it home, Vermont actually encourages its statewide efficiency program administrator, Efficiency Vermont, to deliver efficiency to residents and businesses all across the state. So they set a geographic equity performance incentive for Efficiency Vermont. And when Efficiency Vermont meets that target, they receive additional monetary compensation. We found that between 2018 and 2020, Efficiency Vermont reached 126% of its geographic equity targets. So it's definitely possible to set achievable goals on geographic equity. The second and last solution I'll offer here is to consider on-bill financing. Financing helps lower the upfront cost for efficiency improvements, which I think is often a barrier for efficiency, a barrier to efficiency in rural communities. One popular model for rural electric co-ops is tariffed on-bill financing, which allows a customer to, or a co-op member to repay the cost of their efficiency programs through their utility bill. As an example, a nonprofit in Eastern Kentucky called the Mountain Association for Community Economic Development, or MESED, they administer a tariffed on-bill program on behalf of several Eastern Kentucky co-ops for both residents and small commercial customers. MESED also trains local contractors to deliver the program. Next slide.
We've seen a few ways you can effectively increase awareness and access to these programs. So first, it's essential to partner with local contractors and community members to both design and implement programs. It also helps to work with trusted messengers, trusted within a specific community and demographic, and pursue multiple marketing strategies. So for example, both internet and direct mail, as well as door-to-door and other community outreach. And so there was a question I saw that just popped up in chat, so hopefully that helps with that person's question. So one example where we've seen this play out in practice is the Weatherization Week model we developed over the past many years with island communities. So recognizing the added cost and complexity of doing work out on the islands, so for example, just the $2,000 to get the truck out to Monhegan, we partnered with community energy groups to line up a week's worth of work for contractors to do it all at once. This reduced costs for everyone and made it worthwhile for the contractors to come out for several air sealing and similar projects. It's super important in this approach to work really closely with a local partner who knows the exact situation on the ground and the nuances of how to get folks involved in their community. Another crucial component is regular, frequent, and open communication with a local partner who knows the exact between the community, a regular, frequent, and open communication between that community partner, so that local community partner, an intermediate organization like a nonprofit, that the role that we were playing, or some other coordinator who's familiar with the players. That's key to know who the folks involved are and this type of work. And thirdly, that communication with the contractors involved. We've also seen this model work well for heat pump bulk buys to coordinate demand and simplify the process both for installers and residents. And in fact, Maine's islands where this effort happened have some of the highest concentration of heat pump adoption across the state. Another example is from Rockland, Maine, where the local energy committee tabled at our library before COVID. They gave away LEDs, they shared information about our state efficiency programs, and let people know about the new infrared camera and kilowatt meter that they bought with a small grant from the Island Institute that is now available at our library for a loan. The question also asked about how do you talk about additional benefits? So for example, when folks here have been complaining about the heat, like, oh, it's above 80 degrees right now in coastal Maine. I've been singing the praises about our heat pump that we installed this past winter and spring. So again, that trusted local messenger, it works for me well to talk to my friends and coworkers, but another audience might be a totally different person. Doug, for example, got many of his friends on board, many of his neighbors on board by letting them know that this is one way to not sit in a 60-degree house in the wintertime. Folks might not be going to the library as much today or in the same types of circles that we are used to running in. So one alternative, for example, is that we've been continuing our conversations with the local food bank here, which is unfortunately seeing more traffic now, about how best to do energy outreach with their patrons. Next, please. Our biggest takeaway for you today is that it is possible to bridge the rural efficiency gap, and it's imperative that we all work to do so as part of reducing inequities and starting economic recovery in our communities. Rural households have higher energy burdens than their metropolitan counterparts, and rural communities face distinct challenges to accessing the many benefits of energy efficiency. Rural folks are just as sophisticated as your urban customers. They care about energy efficiency as least as much as the next person. And in fact, they can be pretty savvy when it comes to figuring out clever fixes to pervasive problems. Folks in rural areas are just facing different daily realities and challenges. But the good news is, as you saw in these examples, and as you'll hear about from Aaron, even though it's challenging and the first attempt might not be the perfect one, we can absolutely overcome these obstacles. So some of those effective approaches that we talked about include supporting workforce development, offering flexible financing options, partnering with community members and contractors, and relying on trusted messengers. All of you, utilities, efficiency program administrators, policymakers, and advocates can leverage these strategies to support rural community members in our clean energy future. Next, please. Mary and I mentioned several different resources and studies on the topic, and we encourage you to check those out if you're interested. They're available here on this slide, and we'll make sure that those are available to folks who want them through the program staff. Next, please. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We hope that you enjoyed hearing more about rural energy efficiency and look forward to hearing more of your questions. Here are some ways of getting in touch with us, and I'll pass it back to Mary.
Thanks, Emma. Just to touch on Marty's question, I think it's really important to kind of humanize the benefits of energy efficiency and speak to the needs that people have. As Emma already said, talk about heating or cooling if that's important, if you live in a very hot or cold place. I also just pasted a link into the chat, which it includes testimonials of rural residents who improve their homes through efficiency programs. And it really drives home how much of a difference those programs made in their lives. And then second, on jobs, I would usually say to point to state and local job data. The U.S. Energy Employment Report includes great state fact sheets. However, COVID-19 has changed those numbers quite a bit, unfortunately, for the worse. So they're not quite accurate anymore. BW Research does publish monthly updates on energy efficiency job growth or loss, though, so you could look at those, but they're not local. I would also say if you want to talk about jobs, you can talk about how efficiency jobs are impactful. That's something I've heard a lot, is that efficiency workers like that they're helping the people in their community, and they're also improving the environment and mitigating climate change. Travis, one other comment actually before I hand it back. Just want to note my email address is here. I would love to hear from any of you if ACEEE can be a resource in any way. And I really appreciate MEI prioritizing this topic. Travis or Josh, will hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mary and Emma. Fantastic information about what's going on around the country, and really helping us understand the foundation of this particular issue. So thank you very much. Again, bringing things closer to home, giving you an idea of what's going on here in Missouri's rural community. We have brought back Aaron from Como Connect. Did a great job last year. I appreciate you coming back, Aaron. And I'll hand it over to you to talk about what you guys are up to.
Excellent. First, I'd like to thank you for asking me to join Mary and Emma on the panel. I thought they did a spectacular job. And interestingly, I've noted when I listened to some of the speakers yesterday, I'm going to touch on a few things that they hit as well. So first, introduction and I guess personal overview. I've long been an advocate of both efficiency and connectivity. I have 20 plus years in the electric utility field, certified demand side manager, renewable energy professional, and I've been a certified energy manager for over a dozen years. So in the past, I've actually worked with not just utilities, but also government agencies and charitable organizations to develop energy programs that support rural America. So with that, if you'll move to the next slide, please. Okay. Little, I guess, information regarding the organization I currently work for. Como is an electric utility, so electric cooperative started over 80 years ago. About a decade ago, we got into the business of fiber to the home, or fiber to the premise, including businesses. So I promise I'm not just going to read off the slides. I'll throw in some anecdotes and probably go on a few tangents along the way. But this is pretty much standard data. So 2,300 square mile service territory. We have just around 32,000 meters in that area. And we are over 20,000, at this point, well over 20,000 fiber subscribers. So we serve electricity, internet, broadband up to gigabit, and television and phone. So next slide, please. Let's talk about the energy burden of rural Missouri. So as she mentioned in the previous session, there are, it doesn't seem dramatic, but 4% of the income versus in Missouri for rural households versus 2.8 for urban households is significant. In fact, because it's 4%, it's easy to forget that that's an average. And it's kind of like the old saying about the guy with his head in the oven and his feet in the freezer. You know, on average, I'm comfortable. You really want to understand that 4% also encompasses a lot of people that are struggling dramatically to meet their energy needs. So with that, this is caused by a number of factors in Missouri and actually throughout the country, but we're focused on Missouri. Next slide, please. So total household income, as the census says, 13.3% of people living in rural areas have income below the poverty levels. That's, I guess, the jumping off point for much of the problem is the inability to afford upgrading homes. With regard to that, manufactured housing makes up 3% in the sorry, 3% in urban housing and 15% in rural housing, and that matters a great deal. While it is affordable, unfortunately, a lot of times what you see is the folks that are, and it provides a great solution for a lot of folks. But manufactured housing has some drawbacks. And a lot of that starts with the fact that they are sold to individuals based on their monthly payment rather than the life cycle cost of the investment in that home. So I say that to say, oftentimes in the discussions and the selections of a home and the sale of that home, they will forego, or the salesperson will encourage the homeowner to forego investment in efficiency because they know it will lower their monthly payment of financing on the home, despite the fact that oftentimes 10 years worth of negative impact, or I guess 10 years worth of in 1 year with the efficiency, they will make up the difference in what will hurt them for 10 years on the bad investment in the less efficient equipment. So with regard to that, there's back to there being a few reasons. So on average, again, income tends to be a little less in the country. Power can actually be a little more, and that is a function of just economies of scale. So oftentimes that can be offset by the model that the utility is using. Cooperatives are not for profit. That gives us a little leeway, but at the end of the day, a mile of conductor costs the same whether you're putting it in a city or you're putting it out in the countryside. And if you have 40 people or 40 meters to spread that expenditure over, it's cheaper on an individual basis than it is to spread it across 7.5 meters. So with relation to manufactured homes, the reason that they're an issue, it's not just the equipment itself, it's also the insulation. Just by the nature of the home, there is not enough wall space to put in the amount of insulation that you would normally see in a stick-built house. And with regard to stick-built houses, the countryside also allows you a lot of freedom to do what you want to do. But there is also very little oversight and code enforcement with regard to construction of buildings. And then finally, in the piece that I would like to talk about probably is more of a focus of this, there's a lack of infrastructure that provides data to support smart improvements to homes. So with that, next slide. Okay, so broadband basically plays a key role for both residential and business accounts through access. So access means that you will have access to efficiency monitoring and control of your expenditures associated with energy. So most obvious examples of these, because rural accounts for utilities tend to be 85 to 90% residential, are going to fall in that category. So smart thermostats like a Nest or a Lyric to control the HVAC equipment, lighting controls, and even water heating is now an option. HVAC generally accounts for, and there's different studies, but generally it's accepted that 40% of residential load is going to fall to HVAC, with another 20% falling to water heating, and then lighting coming in at another 10. So with that, all three of those make up the largest portion of what you're going to see. And as of today, all three of those are now cheaply and easily programmed and controlled remotely. As long as you have connectivity, you can create efficiencies there. One of our team members here actually drives an electric car, tracks his usage on our app, controls his smart stat remotely on his phone. And I was recently in his office, well, recent is relative, about 3 months ago, and he was adjusting his water heater temperature. He has a new heat pump water heater on his phone. And he was showing me how much money he was saving doing that. So we're very supportive of those efforts. And I think you'll find that most utilities are, because it's been proven over and over again that correctly applied efficiency improves the load curve. So back to the bottom bullet on the slide, Missouri, I've heard this said over and over again in the last 6 months by Missouri's politicians. We are 48th out of 50 in connectivity, broadband connectivity for high-speed internet. That being said, I do not expect that to remain the case. Recent legislation passed at state level will support additional rollout of high-speed broadband to rural communities. And I know there will be active participation in the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or sorry, yeah, that's right. Rural RDOF is what we generally call it, but Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which means there will be a lot more participants building fiber to the home or trying to provide that connectivity to the rural communities. So I expect that to change rapidly over the next 5 years. Okay, next slide, please. So bridging the energy burden gap. So I mentioned the Nest thermostats or the Lyric or whichever version thereof. I think Lyric is a Honeywell product. They did a study showing that smart control thermostats can save 10 to 12% on your heating and 15% on your cooling. If it's a expenditure that amounts to roughly 40% of your total investment in energy for any given household, that can make a difference. My slide's a little jacked up here, but ultimately, I'm also a fan of geothermal and piggyback units. And when it comes to that, one thing that we have a lot of in rural Missouri that we don't have in cities is space. So it makes sense that there's a lot of opportunity to put in, a lot of space to put in geothermal wells and a lot of opportunity to take advantage of that particular technology. So most utilities, be they urban or rural, have been touting the benefits of geothermal for decades. The nice thing about being in the rural communities is you actually have the space and opportunity to utilize those wells or put them in. So with a heat pump being effectively 300% efficient, the use of geo allows you to never have to convert to the less efficient electric resistance heat, meaning it's a great investment for those financially able. The problem comes in that last statement. So it's not always something that one of our rural community members is able to financially afford. You are talking about an investment that often has a 8 to 10 year payback. So it may not be something they're willing to finance over that time. For a cheaper solution, I mentioned that I like the piggyback units or ones that basically function as a heat pump until the temperature drops below a certain point, usually in the 35 to 40 degree area. And once that happens, it becomes, the heat pump becomes unable to move the heat in the direction it should. And therefore we use a piggyback unit like either natural gas if it's available or propane to basically offset or pick up the load where that lets off instead of electric resistance heat. Not only does that benefit the end user, but that also benefits the utility in that gas is a storable unit, whereas utilizing power, central station power is generated on the spot. So ultimately, by switching to that storable unit and utilizing it to heat, you avoid the peak loading, which would require utilities to build additional power plants, which leads to inefficiencies. As an anecdote, one of our members in our territory, I want to say in Boone County, was the first, Mr. Holliday was one of the first people in the country and definitely in the state to create a energy efficient poultry confinement facility. So I touch a little bit on ag in this presentation because I find a lot of times homesteads that are listed as residential also include ag business. He installed 150 tons of geothermal. And so that meant that he had to put in about 30 wells to support the cooling of the facility. And he was actually also an early adopter of LED lighting and was one of the folks that sorted out so LED technology back when he was initially putting it in was not quite what it is today, but as it developed, he was one of the ones that helped sort out the different light spectrums during each growth cycle, helped with the health of the birds. So, all right, next slide. So I mentioned the lots of land. The EPA estimates weatherization and sealing homes can save an average of 15% in heating and cooling costs. This again is one of those things where we look at issues associated with the ability to actually enact that. I've been on energy audits where, and it's not just insulation itself. If it's a manufactured home, it can come down to skirting. I've been to homes that had high energy costs and learned that the ductwork below the manufactured home had been torn out by the local dog, who found it very warm under there once they had torn a hole in the ductwork, to the dismay of the residents who were paying to warm up their pup, who was now camped out under the home. It's that type of thing where it would be noticeable if you were utilizing some sort of smart stat or to control it. Even if you're not creating the efficiencies of anything else, you can set alarms and alerts that would draw your attention to the fact that there was a problem and you could catch it sooner. So I actually remember, moving on to LED lights. So LEDs use only 25 to 30% of as much energy as your old school incandescent bulbs. And I actually remember when we converted from incandescents to CFLs. And then subsequently, it's interesting to watch everybody as those all get converted from CFLs to LEDs. It's been particularly curious to note the exact same complaints, and they're often legitimate, about both the product quality and the lighting. So they don't last as long as they're supposed to, or I don't like the light, it looks funny to me, it doesn't render, it doesn't look right. And in some cases, they're not wrong. I mean, emerging technologies as a whole and the ability to manufacture them over time improves. So we can do things with LEDs today that weren't remotely possible 10 years ago, using both the light spectrum generated and the refraction technology that allows you to spread the light in a more comfortable manner. At a utility level, it also means that I remember the elimination of mercury vapor bulbs and the transition to high pressure sodium. And now that transition from high pressure sodium to LEDs. Interestingly, there is some of the opposite on the shift from high pressure sodium to LEDs because people tended to not like the amber light. Mercury vapor they had their issues as far as environmentally in that they had mercury in them. And also they were not nearly as efficient, and they did stay in the field forever. The light generated by them would just fall off. And subsequently, when those were converted to, but they were a nice color temperature light. The conversion to high pressure sodium meant that they transferred to a more amber light, which folks did not care for. And the change back to a more natural light with the addition of, or the transition to LEDs has actually been a real positive. With that, and at a utility scale, that conversion to LEDs. So if you're in a city, you have a lot of roadway lighting and that kind of thing. When you're in the country, a lot of the lights that you're talking about that are getting converted are requests. So they're specific requests of yard lights by individual ratepayers. So if you've got a utility that has 30, 40,000 meters, you probably have 16 to 20,000 yard lights that are out there that are paid for by individuals. And even though it's processed through the utility, you want those to be just as efficient. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so take control and save. Now, for electric utility, it's a traditional and often the most effective tool for driving behaviors and creating efficiencies is the rebate. And I think this was touched on a little bit previously by some of the other speakers. But exploring those opportunities for us to really make a difference has been something that utilities have been doing forever. And it's not just that it benefits the individual, and it does. It's also that it allows the utility itself to, again, avoid building higher cost generation facilities. So imagine, if you will, and I know there's a lot of utility folks in the room, but imagine, if you will, you have to build a plant that costs you $40 million and you only run it 2 weeks, not the same 2 weeks, but spread over a year's time, you only run it 2 weeks. You still have to pay for all the carrying costs on that plant. And you had to build it because it's a peaker, because everybody is utilizing energy at the exact same time. The addition of energy efficiency tends to hit on peak, which is why utilities support that. It avoids stranded investment. So with that, we've been very proud of the Take Control and Save program, which operates primarily in Missouri. Of those, I think it's worth noting that some of the rebate, or some of the exact things we've discussed, which is energy efficient lighting, energy efficient water heaters. And I think we mentioned in that that there's been some heat pump water heaters added in, but it's very few compared to all the other items listed on this. And I think it's like less than 100. But I will say that's because they just really started rebating those. I anticipate seeing those go up from here. Geothermal has been something that's been greatly supported. Lighting programs for business has been greatly supported. At the end of the day, all of those programs that have been invested in these are generally G&T driven and then processed through the distribution co-op. So you've got the generation folks that know that it'll benefit them to implement these energy control measures or energy efficiency measures, but they aren't interacting directly with the individual user. That will flow down to the distribution co-ops, who will then subsequently offer a program to help with offsetting the expenditures of putting in efficiency measures. So between 2008 and 2019, basically they estimate that the rebated infrastructure improvements saved 2,465,487,276 kilowatt hours. That is a lot of energy saved. I think Associated, who's been the primary driver on that, is very proud of that, and they should be. Now, the other thing I would suggest is, in any instance when you're working on energy efficiency programs and support for folks that need it and bridging that gap in the rural communities, I would always encourage you to explore and develop partnerships and seek out other avenues that aren't necessarily expected. It's worth the effort. And I'm going to flash back a little bit here, but at one point we were able to, and this was actually in Florida, so I'm jumping back a little ways, but we were able to partner with a local organization that was receiving Weatherization Assistance Program funds, or WAP funds. And what we did is we sought and were able to achieve a grant to replace low-income housing HVAC equipment for rural communities. It was basically a replacement retrofit program. We secured a $750,000 grant, high energy cost grant, and I think that was done through the USDA. So WAP funding won't replace heating and air conditioning equipment. It will weatherize homes, so it'll handle skirting and insulation and that kind of thing. But that's really only half of what you can get done. So we were able to create this program, partner with local folks, identify homeowners in the rural communities that had legitimate problems and concerns. So it may be an old manufactured home, it may be an older stick-built home, but regardless, we would partner, go in, let them vet them out to make sure that they qualified for the program. They would do all the weatherization. We would do the replacement or upgrade of the HVAC equipment. And to be honest, in many instances, we would bring in other charitable organizations too that might help with building a wheelchair ramp or something, whatever was needed. But at the end of the day, we were able to help an immense amount of folks make their homes much more efficient, lower their bills, and lower their energy consumption. So I would absolutely suggest that any utility or anybody that's interested make the effort to reach out to those other organizations that are working at it. Partnerships can very much multiply the effect of the dollars that you're spending. Okay, and with that, next slide. Sorry. Apologies, everybody had to see me drink there. Okay. So these are some rebates that are currently being offered by Missouri's electric cooperatives. Now, it's not uniform in that each of them offers all of these, but this is sort of a menu of what we're seeing across the entirety of the state. So you can see that many of these address the exact things that we've been discussing, making sure that you're putting in high efficiency equipment, supporting even the appliances, supporting Energy Star certified appliances, making sure that everything's insulated as best it can be. And of course, almost every utility does in-home walkthrough audits. So it wouldn't just be that we would, although we will if you're interested in putting in efficiency equipment. We also do what's called an efficiency audit. So if somebody has high bills, oftentimes the utility, and I know we do this, we'll go in and do a blower door test, or maybe use a thermographic camera to identify insulation voids, anything that you can do to point out the issues associated with, it could just be sealing around the windows. There's all kinds of things that end up with you conditioning the outside world that is very much not efficient, that we will help you with. And I have yet to see a utility that's not very happy to go out and assist folks with improving the efficiency of their homestead. Let's see, I had a note here. Yes, and as an aside, this is not on here, to show you how far we've come. I can remember the day where we used to promote heat recovery units. And so this was basically a unit that would sit on the side of the house. And when your HVAC unit would pull heat from the house, it was not terribly efficient. So it would throw a lot of heat out. This particular unit would basically cycle using that heat and dump it back into your water heater to utilize that almost like a geothermal heat pump unit. So whenever you were cooling your home, it would throw off the heat. It would use that heat to reduce your water heater costs. They were very cool and they worked great until you got to about 13 SEER. So the interesting piece is all of our units that are being put forth today are so much more efficient that they don't throw off enough, the SEER ratings on them are so efficient that they don't throw off enough heat to make those worthwhile any longer. Okay. All right. Next and final slide. So I talk in here about the three aspects of the rural Missouri and rural communities and where I think we're going. I talk again about rural connectivity, and probably one of the key reasons I was thought of for this is because, again, I'm not just an advocate for efficiency. We have actually rolled out fiber to the home for our entire community. I think that is going to be the case pretty much across the country. I know there's a high focus on it in Missouri. So what does connectivity mean? Well, for residences, we just mentioned, it allows you the ability to monitor and control the energy uses and the appliances that are using that energy. So for utilities, it also means a couple things. Potential to control yard lights. So not just are you going to have LEDs that are more efficient, but with connectivity across the entirety of the system, you are, I think, eventually going to see a transition where they cut those yard lights during the wee hours of the morning. So most utilities currently utilize a photocell. So when it's dark out, it kicks on. When it's light out, it kicks off. Except for those ones that have a bad photocell that you see on all the time until somebody gets out with a truck to change them. So I think you're going to see some efficiency there. You will also see the ability to provide, to collect data on an hourly basis and use that data on everybody's individual usage to provide pricing signals, again, to avoid the construction of power plant and the burning of fuels or collection of fuels or utilization of fuels unnecessarily. So for homeowners, I mentioned the thermostat. While they're away, they can get alerts, they can set their usage patterns, and they can adjust it. If they went vacation for a week, because nobody gets to do that these days, but let's assume that one day they will, when we finally have the whole pandemic behind us. They leave for a week, they forgot to adjust their thermostat to give themselves savings while they're gone. No problem, log in and get that switched. Same with control of their lighting. both their smart plugs and smart bulbs that are utilized these days. And finally, water heating, as I mentioned. Used to be your best case scenario was a water heater timer that you could set up that ran basically on a switch, a timered switch. They were not exactly ideal. Now, these days, the ability to connect and establish smart water heating so that you're not heating water unnecessarily is a thing that can truly save you some money. Additionally, you've got agriculture. Now, this is interesting, I think, in that I think you're going to see precision planting. Well, you're already seeing it in some areas, and I think Mizzou is actively working on some of these processes. But precision planting, watering, fertilizing, et cetera, basically means higher yield with less resources. Less waste water, less waste investment fertilizer, less fuel for the equipment that's going out and being utilized to put that in. Variable frequency drives are going to be used in the future in agricultural production. And this can be anything from well pumps to belt motors. So you could see belt motors on grain storage and on timber cutting. Unfortunately, sawmills are not ideal loads for most utilities. Variable frequency drives help with that. You're also going to see better monitoring and control of lumber drying and kilns, so you can avoid peaks. And they may be producing boards, or they may even be producing pelletized wood fuel. I previously worked with a company that took all the wood scraps from the region and harvested woody understory and pelletized it for sale overseas. Interestingly, the market in Germany made it more attractive to put it on a boat and ship it over than it was to utilize it in country. Ultimately, though, the thing that I think is most important is the connectivity in the rural communities drives innovation. So I've mentioned a lot of interesting stuff, and each of those is its own individual innovation. And I think you're going to see more, but you need the connectivity to really drive that. And I'll close on this note because I think it really demonstrates that. We have a young lady who is, I believe she's not even out of high school, but she's the inventor of what amounts to an Apple Watch for cows. And I know that sounds weird, but in the state of Missouri, you've got sort of a dividing line where up north, they do row crops, and then around, 44, it transitions to where you have a lot of timber and cattle. So one of the more dangerous times for a cow is when it's calving. So she got the idea of creating basically an Apple Watch that goes on the cow that monitors its health and location. So more cows, I think, died during calving than probably any other time. So the tradition is when they're out wandering, you don't know where they are and you don't know when they're going to give birth, but the connectivity would allow any cattle farmer to be alerted and directed to a cow that was having an issue during calving, and they could go out, intervene, and prevent both death and waste of resources. I think that's pretty impressive, and it's something that doesn't work without that connectivity. And with that, I think that's about all I've got. I'm open to any questions you all have. I'll do my best. Oh, I got a note from Todd that says WAP funding will replace HVAC systems. Those replacements can be done at cost-effective measures. I don't know when that changed, but it was not available through the people that we worked with in Florida, and that could have been a decade ago. So you have to forgive me on that. Let's see, Mary Shoemaker, another resource, ACE. All right, I think that's all I've got on that.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I appreciate it. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If you have any, please go ahead and submit those. I guess one question I had for each of you is when we look at addressing this gap, who is not playing a role right now that should be playing a role? Who's not engaged that needs to be engaged? And we'll work from Mary, Emma to Aaron.
Sure. I think co-ops and munis, there's a lot of opportunity for increasing their engagement. I think in a lot of states, perhaps they might not realize they might not be aware of some of these tools for delivering efficiency programs in partnership with one another, or there might not be a state policy driver for them to do so. And so I think there's an opportunity to educate them as to how meaningful these programs can be for their members, and then also demonstrate how they can actually achieve these savings themselves. Before we move on, I just wanted to, can I answer the on-bill financing question that was in the chat box?
Absolutely, yes.
I just wanted to relay there that some on-bill financing programs are designed so that the costs of the the cost savings monthly exceed the repayment costs monthly. Not all programs are, but I think most tariffed on-bill programs are designed that way. And some tariffed on-bill programs actually allow payments to be annualized. So since many savings will occur during peak heating and cooling months. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Absolutely. Emma, and feel free to answer both those, the on-bill financing as well as the who's not engaged that should be engaged question.
I would flip that question and ask, why are the folks who are closest to the work not able to do so? I don't think it's a matter of engagement. I think it's a matter of the barriers that we talked about. And that means that it can seem, even though the cost savings are often pretty apparent to folks who are working in this field, there are just huge barriers to be able to do anything about it today, tomorrow. Like, it ends up being the bottom of your to-do list. And that has to do with structural inequities that mean that folks are not easily able, that they're overworked, underpaid, health issues are not addressed properly. And so it's a pretty big issue that I think we can all work on to tackle larger daily problems that manifest in looking like the folks who should be engaged, not able to do so. So for example, those local energy committees at the town and community and municipal level, those we've seen to be super effective. And many communities are just facing lack of capacity, right? There just aren't enough people who have the time to be able to put into those. And I think that's I think solving that problem is more of a question, more the question to start with. On the flip side, I would say the folks who are engaged, so all of the program design folks, the more that you can spend time with the people that you're trying to support, whether it's through rebates or program design or whatever, the better off you'll be. The more you show up and say and see with your own eyes, and I recognize that travel can be hard today. We're starting to figure out as a community development organization how to safely engage directly with our constituents. There are ways to do so. The more you can show up and really experience deeply what that is like, the better you'll be able to design your programs.
Great. Aaron?
As far as engagement, I tend to agree with them. I don't know that it's an engagement issue. I think it's the ability to connect with the folks, or lack of resources or lack of focus. On a general residential basis, now, the downside of this is, I used to do energy audits, and you would folks every year and you'd give them the same advice every year. It just wouldn't hit the radar, despite the fact that it just wouldn't hit the top of the priority list, despite the fact that they would continue to pay more than they should. So encouraging that, or finding ways to encourage that's a positive. I also know that it's a struggle to connect with many of the contractors. So after the downturn a decade or so ago, a lot of the folks that were in the business of home construction weren't anymore after about 2 years. And I think those trades are still suffering. The ones that are still in the business have so much to say grace over, they can barely, spare a moment to talk to a utility. I think it's difficult to engage them because of that. I think as those trades improve and you get more people entering the marketplace, it'll get better, and there'll be more opportunity to connect once you can actually hold trainings and functions and that kind of thing. But I think that's a bit of a struggle. And then at a statewide or even national level, there are things that can be done. But again, if asked to deal with the coronavirus problem or deal with energy efficiency, the energy efficiency isn't going to hit the top of the bill. And I think it's just a constant effort to communicate and persuade the benefits of this that will get us there. But there are hurdles. And I don't think it's a lack of intentional engagement. I just think that there's communication and resource issues.
Makes sense. We do have a question, and it kind of goes off what you're talking about there, Aaron, and that was from Richard. What kinds of contractors? Is it sector, HVAC, insulation, or is it some other attribute that makes them the best to approach to pick up the banner and work in these communities that are harder to reach? Is there a certain special sauce that goes into contractors that we might be able to reach out to and partner with?
I'll go back again to the familiarity with the communities you're working with. So people who physically live nearby, who have connections to that area, and who know what the homes look like, who know what the reasons are that that efficiency project just hasn't reached the top of that potential customer's list. People who are willing to, so when we did a heat pump installation project over the past year, since we moved into my home in Maine last fall, and it was just so much more pleasant, let alone cost effective, to work with folks who were willing to spend the time, who understood what it means to live in an old, rambly, extension plus extension plus extension leaky farmhouse, right? That would be my recommendation in terms of how, it's not necessarily a secret sauce in terms of like certification or training. It's just familiarity with what it actually means to do those types of jobs. And a caring to do so, I would add that.
Yeah. Aaron, any thoughts?
I don't know that there's a secret sauce. I do find I had a lot more success spiffing this has been again 10 years ago, but I had a lot more success spiffing the salespeople than I did the homeowner when I wanted them to put in a more efficient HVAC system on a manufactured home. So it creates an incentive for the person that you may not ever get an opportunity to have the discussion with the individual energy user before it's all on site and everything's put, it's on site bill, and all of a sudden it gets to be winter and they've got a $450 power bill. That's when you find out about it. If you can get in front of that and get with the contractor or the salesperson and spiff them for putting in a more efficient unit. And I think that general concept applies to construction in general. If you were working with the HVAC contractors, if you're working with the manufactured home salesperson, if you're working with the insulators, getting with them and making sure that they know about the incentives so that they can push them to make the sale, is the right. I don't know if that answered what you're asking, but that's been my experience.
I think that's helpful. There is one other question here. We'll make this our last question. That is, are you seeing communities of faith getting involved in this at all? Are they helping their communities and these rural communities take advantage of their opportunities? Mary, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. I am not aware of specific examples where community of faith engaged on rural efficiency, but I know there's a national nonprofit called Interfaith Power and Light, and they have state-based chapters that I do know care about efficiency. So I think they would make for wonderful partners. It seems like Emma might have specific examples though.
Yeah, I was going to say Interfaith Power and Light is great as a national example, as a starting point. And I've seen fantastic organizing in various faith communities. I've been delighted to be asked a few times to talk in local churches and synagogues and had really great interfaith conversations, which is fantastic. It's a great starting point. And that goes back to my previous point about working with trusted messengers within very specific communities. So that for some areas might mean geography, and some it might mean religious affiliation. But those are really fantastic starting points. And I really appreciate those types of engagement, since they're always really fun and have a nice additional layer to why folks are coming to this work that can be incredibly powerful and motivating and effective.
Great. Aaron, any last words?
I would say I'm going to be looking up Interfaith Power and Light and see if they have a chapter in Missouri. Outside of that, I do not generally see religious institutions helping with efficiency. They tend to be helping with the bill itself, which doesn't solve the long-term problem, but it does serve the immediate need of keeping someone with lights and heat. But hey, it's on my to-do list. I will be checking that out. Either of you happen to know if there's a Missouri chapter?
Oh, not off the top of my head. But if you have trouble finding Aaron, I'm happy to find connections to those folks. But go ahead, Mary.
I don't know offhand if there's a Missouri chapter.
Aaron, I know for sure there's one in Kansas City. That's where the person that leads it is that I've worked with. So happy to make that connection afterwards at the top.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, with that, Aaron, Emma, Mary, thank you so much. A great topic. I know that we're going to continue to work on here in Missouri. And I think our opportunities only grow with the work that Aaron's doing and the state's doing overall by creating greater connectivity in rural Missouri. I think that will expand our opportunity to address the efficiency gap here. So hopefully we'll be talking more and you'll be hearing more about what's going on in Missouri. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely. So with that, we will hop into our next session, which is on time of use rates. For those of you who have been here all morning, obviously there was some connection with the advanced metering session that was going on earlier, and there is definitely an overlap. So it's part of our design for setting this up here today. So with that, I'm happy to bring to you Mark from the Regulatory Assistance Project, Sarah from the Missouri Public Service Commission, Stephen from Ameren, and Jeffrey from Evergy, who will be presenting to you today on this particular topic. Kicking us off is Mark from the Regulatory Assistance Project. Mark, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much for having me, Josh. For those of you who aren't familiar with RAP, we're a national, international nonprofit that advises a wide variety of state agencies on regulatory issues, and we work with stakeholders and others interested in these complex, detailed matters. So my presentation starts off with a high-level overview of all the different things you want to think about when you're designing time of use rates. And that's just a little bit of principles and background that many of you will be familiar with, key design choices, and then some particularly interesting real world examples from across the country. Thanks. So as I'm sure most of you know, there's often 3 steps in the rate making process. First, you have the determination of the revenue requirement, and then you have customer classes where you're splitting up the costs, and then you design the retail rates. While often you were just talking about the last step when you're talking about time of use rates, I am going to mention how you would think about customer classes in this context and subclasses. So next slide. So rate structure is often a phrase that refers to both the cost allocation and rate design steps shown previously. There are a wide array of goals you're trying to accomplish simultaneously. And I'd sort of try to distill down here 5 primary goals, which is a lot of overlap with the bond-buy principles and other things you'll see, but you want to collect the right amount of revenue, you want to fairly apportion costs, you want to have efficient levels of usage, you need to implement the rates and customers need to be able to understand them. And then there are a wide variety of public policy goals involved. Typically, when we're in a rate case, cost allocation is treated as a group equity issue, and then rate design is about forward-looking incentives, customer understanding, and individual bill impacts for customers. But as we go forward, if we need bigger reforms, you might have to think about both of these simultaneously. Next slide. So RAP has tried to come up with a few more specific principles for rate design. You know, the more specific your principles, the more actionable they can be. Our 3 principles from a report from a few years ago are that customers should be able to connect to the grid for no more than the cost of connecting to the grid. Customers should pay for grid services and power supply in proportion to how much they use. And customers who supply power to the grid should be fairly compensated for the full value of the power they supply. With time of use rates, it's mostly this second principle that's in play here. Next slide. So the key goal of time of use rates is to improve the efficiency and cost causation basis of rates to provide better incentives to customers. So the places where you have a clear case for time of use and time varying rates is the shared elements of the system, where the requirements, what the utility needs to build and supply to customers is driven by the shared requirements of all the customers on that portion of the grid. There are exceptions to that, the simple meters, service drops that are dedicated to a single customer, some transformers are dedicated to single customers, but for the most part, almost all the electric system is shared. So is an interesting place to look for time varying rates. And the basis for these time varying rates varies a bit by function. So on the power supply side, fuel prices, spot energy, and contract purchases can vary by time. In terms of generation capacity, coincident peaks drive the overall amount you need, but the optimal mix is driven by the year-round load patterns, how much base load power you need, for example. Similarly, coincident peaks matter in designing your transmission and distribution system, but line losses, and there's some other important considerations at the same time. And then it's important to think of trade-offs across categories and types of costs. For example, if you improve the efficiency of the distribution system, you're lowering your generation capacity requirements. Next slide. So at a very high level, we're going to look at some of the key design choices. So again, it's important to touch on some of the goals here. What we want to do is improve the efficiency and cost causation basis of rates so that people's individual customers' decisions, both day-to-day decisions like turning on and off their lights or running their washers and dryers, and then their investment decisions can be better. And at the same time, we want to avoid sort of negative impacts inadvertently. Adverse impacts to revenue sufficiency and stability, individual customers' bills. We want to make sure that the time of use rates are understandable to customers so that they can manage their bills. And I'm going to look at 4 key design choices: which customers, what kind of time patterns, which costs, and then customer understanding and bill impacts. So in terms of which customers, some of the typical choices start off with, is it opt-in, is it opt-out, is it mandatory? And those features can be different for different classes of customers. In some places, rates can be or are more sophisticated automatically for industrial customers. This is a little afield from time of use rates, but in New York, industrial customers have mandatory hourly pricing based on their wholesale markets, which is something you wouldn't necessarily want to do for residential customers. So you can think about it across customer classes. And if you're going to looking at redesigning customer classes, there are a range of things, or creating subclasses, there are a range of things to think about. One clear cost distinction that is used in some places is that sub-transmission customers, primary distribution customers, and secondary customers effectively end up using different parts of the system. The secondary system isn't used by transmission customers, obviously, and can and should be allocated just to secondary customers. So that's one cost basis for dividing up customers. And then more commonly, there's sort of just by type of customer: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, irrigation. It's all phrased differently in different places. And then the more sophisticated thing that is being explored in a lot of places is how do you sort of redefine subclasses within these classes? So low income rates are common in some places. A distinction between single family and multifamily can have a good cost basis. And then there's a question about whether specific end uses have their own rates. I tend to prefer technology neutral rates because it's less discriminatory and provides an equal basis for charging costs. Next slide. So in terms of designing the peak periods for time of use rates, well, first you have to decide how many different periods you want to have. If you have simple metering, some places you can only do 2 time periods. If you have advanced metering, you can do more time periods, 3, 4, you can go crazy with it. But in terms of just the primary peak period, there are some trade-offs. If you go too narrow, if you just have a 1 hour peak, you risk missing the peak or just shifting it a little bit without reducing it. If you go too broad, if you have a 12-hour peak period, it makes shifting load really difficult for customers, and it can penalize people who don't have shiftable load within that window. If you have a peak period from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., for example, elderly customers those are the old end who are home all day, they have to use energy during those hours, so it can be overly punitive. So, RAP and others tend to recommend a peak period between 3 and 6 hours as balancing this appropriately. But then there are options to try to address these challenges in different ways. You can have different peak periods for different rate classes. And then within rate classes, there's different terms for this, but you can do feathering. There's an Arizona utility that allows customers to choose between different 3-hour periods where you have overlap with a central hour that is most likely to be the peak, but then you don't overly burden customers. You give them each a 3-hour window where they can easily shift outside of it. Next slide. So this is just an example of how you might design a cost-based time of use rate using embedded costs. Once you have functionalized or sub-functionalized costs, you can just, in a smart way by time, you can use those to allocate them within time periods. Next slide. So if you've analyzed the cost of the baseload generation, transmission backbone, and distribution backbone, you can put all of that in the off-peak rate year-round. Then you can have a mid-peak rate with a mid-merit generation, sort of local network transmission and distribution augmentation gets put into sort of the middle hours to the longer hours of the day. And then you can have a peak rate that's, as I said, 4 to 6 hours, 3 to 6 hours wide, where peaking distribution and generation costs are put. And then a critical peak rate can be layered on top of all of that too. Next slide. Understandability and transitions are important. Ultimately this is about the customers and they need to be able to interact with the system. There are lots of different basic explanations and educational materials that can be provided. With AMI, lots of data provision and online tools can help too. Gradual transitions can help diffuse knowledge and gain customer acceptance. In many cases, you could start with an opt-in program and then move over a series of years to opt-out or mandatory. There's shadow billing and hold harmless protection. That's where there's the lower bill wins rule. And then there's lots of companion programs you can think about. Cost-effective energy management technology, and then special low-income programs. If you're going to put low-income customers on some of these rates, you can give them timers for free is sort of a simple example. Next slide. So we're just going to look quickly at a few real-world examples here. So in Colorado, the Fort Collins Municipal Utility has moved all residential customers to a default time of use rate. It varies by season. It has a tier charge in it because their older rate had a tiered inclining block rate. So there's a lot of things here that are intended to reflect gradualism a little bit. And the interesting thing is that they have separate on-peak and off-peak time periods depending on the season. Next slide. So in different places, you'll see very different cost patterns. So in Hawaii, where there's a ton of solar, and that ends up being the lowest price period of the day. So as systems change over time, you can and should update your time periods and your different on-peak, off-peak rates to reflect that. In places with high solar penetration, you'll probably evolve towards something that looks like this. That may or may not happen in Missouri, but something to think about. And then another fun wrinkle that Oklahoma Gas and Electric, they have an optional rate called variable peak pricing, where in the summer, what they do is they look at updated market conditions and announce a day in advance whether it's going to be a low price day, a standard price day, or a high price day, or a critical price day, so that there's an active updating component. But customers are alerted a day in advance. There's some nice customer gradualism features built into this too. Low income and senior customers are given a discount, and there's some free timers involved as well. Next slide. So just a few very high level takeaways. Time of use rates and their cousins, virtual peak pricing, critical peak pricing, are important tools to optimize future system costs. The key design choices that I mentioned, you have to look at them all together because they impact customers together. And then lastly, decoupling and fuel adjustment clauses. Those can help lower the downsides of revenue sufficiency and stability to the extent that's a concern. So that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, next up, we're going to have Sarah Lang with the Missouri Public Service Commission. So take it away, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lange, and I work closely with Robin Pleathermus and others on the figure out exactly what charge, usually down to the 5th place behind the decimal, needs to go on each utility's tariff for each of its 50 or so rate elements, so that that utility has a reasonable opportunity to earn a return on its prudence investments. So please bear in mind that it's my job to be incredibly tedious and somewhat focused on problems that may be unique to Missouri utilities. Back in 2017, 2018, the Commission directed staff to take a look at what it will take to facilitate deployment of distributed energy resources. What we found was that one of the big barriers to mutually economic implementation of DERs is the lack of rate recognition for how the value of energy on a utility system varies with geography and with time. To get on the path to comprehensive rate structure reform, we identified our plan to first implement a mild differential TOU rate structure for all customers with the intent to get customers aware of the idea of time variant rates and conscious of when they use energy before we layer on the more sophisticated features such as were discussed by Mr. LaBelle. Today, we'll talk about some of the complications to diving headfirst into aggressive TOU rate structures in light of concerns with volatility for both customers and utilities, and seeing how these concerns create a real barrier to driving peak shaving or load shifting measures with rate design. Slide. The complications we identified are first that the current fuel adjustment clause base factor design impedes aligning revenue recovery with differences in market energy costs. Next, that there is a tension between price signals that incent behavior changes and supporting revenue sufficiency under our existing statutes. And finally, the recognition that targeted incentives and pricing through locational DER or DR alternatives are also available as options. Slide. At our workshop back in February of 2018, presenter Chris Villarreal of Plugged In Strategies applied the Brown-Bright principles to time variant rates. Put together a really excellent presentation. I encourage you to take a look at these and really think through each one. We can skip ahead a couple slides here. There we go. So here I've identified some of the principles that seem to be in tension. We know that in the revenue requirements we study, that the long-term marginal cost for a given cost element will likely exceed the utility's incremental cost of providing that service or the utility's shadow price of eliminating that sale. And that impedes our ability to reasonably meet revenue requirements without something like decoupling. And if we're trying to achieve stable revenues and have some level of month-to-month stability for customers, how do we do that when the big cost drivers for energy and capacity costs are isolated not only to a couple hours a day, but really a few months of the year. Slide. As we mentioned at the outset, staff used the most reasonable way of implementing TOU for all customers to be starting with a mild differential rate design. How mild are we talking about? Well, our direct recommendation in the recent rate cases, we've looked at using the existing residential rate elements and putting the revenue for rate increases into peak periods or removing the revenue for rate decreases from the off-peak period. We feel this approach is seamless for customers, and it ought to be easy for utility messaging, sort of a, hey, you're just getting a rate increase on the energy you use in a couple hours, or the energy you use overnight just got cheaper. This is a strategy we've seen work for several of the co-ops in Missouri that have implemented mandatory TOU, and that mild differential falls somewhere between tomato soup and Taco Bell sauce on our scale here. Now, what we've done in these cases in our direct is recommended coupling these transitions to this mild TOU with very aggressive customer engagement and use of shadow billing. Of course, the utilities have pushed back against those recommendations. So in settlement, we've backed off the size of the TOU differential and agreed to less direct customer utility interaction, or for shorter periods of AMI data as the basis for that interaction. So at the end of the day, even that 1 cent or half cent differential is a stronger price signal than the existing rate structure, and it does start to get customers thinking about the time element of energy value. Slide. So with that in mind, it's important to remember we're coming at this from an embedded cost-based perspective, and we're not asking ourselves, how do we get 5% of customers to change 40% of their energy usage? We're asking, how do we get 100% of customers contributing revenues corresponding to the cost that they cause to the system? That substantial behavior shifting price signal is likely going to exceed what we can get as a purely cost-based price signal, particularly if we're also trying to respect customer bill volatility and stay targeted on an ordered revenue requirement. Slide. Now, before we could get too far down the road of time variant rates, we found some initial challenges in information availability and existing practices. First off, we need to know when energy is sold and who is buying it. Now, doesn't AMI metering answer this? Yes, but the software that makes that data usable and the utility's priorities are turning out to be kind of the missing link in that chain at this time. So I do encourage you to take a look at the WRAP desk book that came out last November. It has some great and practical guidance on cost allocation, really getting at some of those principles that Mr. LaBelle talked about, tying them from just the rate design to the cost allocation, really starting to loop those two together. Part of that is don't take the utility's distribution system cost classifications for granted. The accuracy of those amounts are critical to identifying what level of cost recovery should be tied to which rate element. That's something that in the past there hasn't been a great deal of dollars associated with, so it's been easy to gloss over. With some infrastructure build out we're seeing right now, those dollar values are really going up. Look at your billing alignment with your billing months. Time-based rate for an afternoon in April is not going to be the same as a time-based rate for an afternoon in July or August. That's what happens when your billing months get out of whack. And finally, winter is not 8 months long. Energy prices, distribution utilization, intra-year capacity requirements being considered at MISO, those all point to rates applicable in the shoulder months should not be the same as those in the deep winter season we might see in December and January. Slide. So that brings us to the fundamental questions to ask yourself when you're looking at really calculating a cost-based rate. Basically, that's which costs can be avoided or reduced, how can increases be avoided or mitigated, and when and how do customers see that revenue impact? Bearing in mind, cost-based in the rate-making context has to consider how that cost is reflected in other cost recovery mechanisms, not just the base rates. Slide. So the question is not only how do we avoid avoidable costs, it's also when and how do customers receive the benefit of those cost reductions. We're really going to focus on market energy, and those changes are actually passed through the FAC for Missouri's investor-owned utilities on a different lag than when they are seen in rate cases. Slide. Now, this is the really tedious part, but understanding this FAC issue is critical to calculating a holistic cost-based time variant rate design. We're going to start by looking at energy cost recovery under a flat rate without an FAC. In a month, when people are buying more energy at retail, we are likely to see above normal energy prices at wholesale. And when energy is more expensive than normal, the marginal cost to the utility for the energy to support each additional sale of a kWh consumes more and more of the revenue the utility receives for each kWh sold to customers from its customers. Now contrast that to the situation with an FAC. The energy cost per kWh still rises as more kWh are required, but the energy cost recovery is locked in by that FAC base. So in the graph on the left, the blue bar moves with the rising cost, illustrated by the black line. But once we introduce the FAC to the right, the blue bar is indifferent to the rising cost of energy. So without the FAC, in a hotter than normal year, the utility sells more kWh at a lower margin over energy cost per kWh. So over recovery is mitigated by the increase in relative energy costs. But with the FAC, when we have a hotter than normal year, the utility sells more kWh at the same margin over energy cost per kWh, meaning customers are going to over-contribute to the utility revenue. Slide. And so here's that same illustration, but from a revenue per customer standpoint. We'll see what kind of exacerbates this. We see when revenue goes up, but the energy cost recovered from each kWh stays the same, which means that when sales go up a little, revenues in excess of fuel cost go up a lot. Since those rates were designed to recover more or less fixed costs to begin with, we see utility over-earning when sales are above normal and utility under-earning when sales are below normal. When the actual FAC charges, then the actual FAC charges or credits come through and further exacerbate that improper revenue position. Now we'll get back to TOU. Next slide. So we have that same problem with the TOU rate based on, we have the same problem with the TOU rate based on energy price differentials in the presence of the current design FAC. In the left graph, we see an example rate that recovers the difference in energy costs for the on-peak and off-peak time periods with no FAC. When we introduce the FAC, it flattens that differential as shown in the graph on the right. You see the blue bar stays even. So even though we've designed the revenue recovery of non-energy costs to be neutral between the two time periods, the operation of the FAC shifts that recovery into the on-peak period. Here is why you should care about revenue recovery when you're talking about energy efficiency. In this example, which is a pretty mild differential based only on energy cost differences, the utility has to sell 1.67 kWh off-peak to remain revenue neutral with avoiding the sale of a single kWh on-peak. Now the customer only saves 40% for moving that kWh to off-peak from on-peak. So the difference there is that a load shifting measure has to use less than 140% of the original energy level for the customer to break even, and a measure has to use more than 167% of the original energy level for the utility to break even. Those numbers just don't happen. You can't do both. Slide. So how do we fix this problem? We potentially use different base factors for different time periods within our time variant rate design. That sounds easy, but it actually would require a complete rethinking of how the FAC works. We've got some great people working on the FAC for staff, but this isn't a small thing and it's not an easy thing. So even if we do go this route of coming up with multiple FAC bases, remember that that energy price differential is probably only going to get us about a 2-cent or so rate differential, and that differential is not likely to incent significant changes in energy consumption. Slide. So the next costs we can look to for increasing our price differentials are the capital and operating costs of capacity, transmission, and distribution, as noted by Mr. LaBelle. Now, when and how a capital cost decreases or an avoided cost increase happens is really tricky. There are non-investment means of meeting capacity requirements, such as through contracts, demand response, and there are non-capacity reasons that may drive further investments in production facilities or retirements. Those are ranging from renewable energy goals and perceived environmental liabilities to earnings per share targets. Now, similarly, over time with robust time-based rates, we'd expect the distribution system investment required to get reduced to reflect lower peak loads or better utilization of the system. But utilities don't go out and replace a larger gauge distribution line with a smaller line, or switch out new transformers or switches just because loads went down, and it's unlikely it would be cost effective for them to do so. Much of the distribution grid in Missouri is fairly new due to storm restoration efforts in the last decade or so, and the portions that are older are currently being replaced pursuant to some legislatively created incentives. So any reduction in required distribution capacities will not be reflected in reduced infrastructure for probably about 40 years or so. Slide. Now, even though it's not a perfect relationship, we can reasonably assign capacity and distribution system costs to peak summer and peak winter months and peak times within those months. But assigning capacity costs to times of peak consumption increases the likelihood of spiky bills for customers and intensifies customer and company exposure to weather. And that means that in a heat wave, the utility will over-earn even more than usual for the weather, and vulnerable customers will be placed at even greater risk, and same but opposite problem in the event of mild weather. So the $10 billion question is, how can you base price signals on long-term actionable marginal costs while giving a realistic opportunity to meet revenue requirements and maintain affordability month to month for customers? Slide. So one answer we looked at in a recent Ameren Gas case, where we were looking to support an inclining block rate design, is to place the ROE and income tax portions of revenue requirement in that more risky rate block. Here's a rough example of some rates that could fall out of that with an energy cost differential. And note that we've introduced this shoulder season, which again, we just think is paramount to these rates making sense. Some more possibilities, next slide, is looking at coincident peak demand charges. And those have the potential to target high cost hours in a way that mitigates volatilities. In other words, you base what each customer would owe on what's happening in a couple of hours, but then we spread that out over the next year. That has some advantages and some disadvantages. And the emphasis here is coincident peak, not a customer NCP. Those customer NCPs really don't have much basis to anything other than very local distribution facilities. Another option is having the differential start out large and then on a monthly or seasonal basis decline or disappear as an individual's consumption exceeds a target level of revenue. And that's with Ameren, we have the surcharge, is that for a given customer after a given point of consumption, that surcharge goes away, or a declining block similar to what we have, but time-based, where you might have a charge that starts out at, say, 16 cents for on-peak consumption, but then after the 600th kWh consumed on peak might drop down to maybe 5 cents. That, again, those are made up numbers, but that's just to illustrate the concept. Slide. And finally, revenue decoupling or revenue stabilization mechanisms obviously have a lot of potential, as does modified interim energy charges, where excess revenues could be refunded back to the contributing customers. Those probably aren't viable under our current statutes, but it is something to think about. So that was a lot of nitty-gritty rate design. Congratulations if you stayed awake, and back to Josh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Next up, we have Stephen with Ameren, Missouri. Stephen, all yours.
All right, thank you, Josh. As Josh said, my name is Steve Wells. I'm with Ameren, Missouri as the Director of Rates and Analysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Ameren, Missouri's journey that we're on right now to advance time of use rates for our residential customers. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit about our new offerings, kind of what was our rationale for promoting them, and then close with a little bit about the customer outreach and communication strategy we're going with to kind of bring customers along with these rates, educate them about the new options that they have and the like. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So Ameren, Missouri had a rate review that was initiated in 2019. We filed for a rate decrease, and that played out and new rates took effect just this spring. As a part of that, we took the initiative to try to modernize our residential rate offerings. So historically, like most utilities, that have operated in the country for decades or a century, we had a fairly flat, non-time differentiated rate structure that didn't really reflect the cost structure of the electric system of the grid to customers. We worked a lot with Dr. Ahmed Faruqi of the Brattle Institute, who's kind of a leading rate design expert in the country and has published a lot and spoken a lot on the topic. And we worked with him to find ways to modernize our rate offerings. Now, the timing of this is also driven largely by our investment in automated metering infrastructure, AMI. You heard a little bit earlier from Jeff Esserman from our Smart Meter project about our investments in that, and we're rolling out those new meters now. They facilitate our ability to do these new rate designs in a more cost-effective manner, and in a way that simply just makes it more feasible to offer them on a large scale to customers and bill them. So our goals really, when we set out in the 2019 rate review, were to first of all leverage those capabilities of our AMI investment to provide customer benefits. I jumped to my third large bullet down there first, because that was really an enabler and it was a critical thing to set up our ability to do time of use rates. But with that, we wanted to take those meters and provide customers with greater choice, convenience, and control about managing their energy costs. We know that different customers have different preferences in terms of cost certainty versus having opportunities to save that can be presented by time of use rates. So we wanted to provide a variety of options to meet different customers where they are and help them to achieve their goals. And next, I would say, Mark gave a great presentation about the cost basis for time of use rates and why, rate making theory aligns with charging different costs at different times of day. That was a big goal of ours as well, is to improve the alignment of our rate structure with the cost of providing service. Mark talked about those, what we call in the rate design, folks, the Bond-Bright principles of equity and economic efficiency. And there's several other goals as well that we had in mind, but definitely we're thinking of those concepts that Mark talked about and did a great job expressing earlier. And finally, of course, the time of use rates is an effort to get customers to respond to price signals. So to the extent that we can use those rates to get customers to reduce their load at peak times and maybe add incremental load when load is low, that has an economic impact on improving, the economics of the system, essentially improving system utilization and making the per unit cost of the system lower. And finally, that type of load shifting and demand flexibility can be key going forward as the utility, like Ameren Missouri is engaged in right now, adds more renewables. We have 700 megawatts of wind going in this year. There's a variety of different solar facilities that we've had installed recently, and we know some of our customers install solar as well. Those renewable resources that are great for transitioning our system to a cleaner system have intermittency that can be mitigated a little bit by demand flexibility that can be introduced by time use rates. So let's go on to the next slide. So this slide, I'm not going to go in great detail through all of it, but this is just kind of an introduction to the suite of rates. And I mentioned we have a variety of rate options for residential customers to meet them where they are. And our goal is to provide customers with greater choice, convenience, and control about how they manage their energy costs. Now, how we were trying to communicate about this is to do something we call lifestyle framing, because some of these different rates have different time of use characteristics, and they might work better for some customers than others. So again, I'm not going to read the slide to you in great detail, but you start from the left side of the slide with the anytime user rate. That's what we're calling it now. That's our pre-existing flat rate. And so a customer who really wants to keep things as simple as they can and doesn't want to change can avail themselves of the historical rate. But as you move from left to right across this slide, we have increasingly sophisticated time of use rates. The second slide, and Sarah Lange just spoke about the staff's goal of rolling out a default time of use rate with a real mild differential. And that evening morning saver rate was basically, is a step in that direction, because this is going to be default rate for our customers after they've had an AMI meter for 6 months. and it's got a 12-hour long on-peak period, which, you know, as Mark mentioned earlier, that long on-peak period could be difficult for customers to manage their usage. But by the same token, it's a very small energy pricing differential, as again, as Sarah talked about. So the bill impacts for customers are not going to be very significant, but it gives them an opportunity to do small things to move load to overnight and save a little bit of money. And it exposes them to that concept of time of use. But as you go farther and farther to the right, we have rates more like what Mark was talking about. So I'll probably focus a little bit on our Smart Saver rate through some of the things in this discussion. That is a pure time of use rate, but with some very significant differentials. And I'll illustrate that rate a little bit later, but it has that 2 to 7 peak, which is consistent with some of the things that Mark was talking about, which is just a 5-hour window with a significant price premium in that on-peak period. But it comes with a deeper discount in the off-peak that customers can save more money if they're able to avoid just that 5-hour window. So again, we're going to talk to customers about their lifestyles and say, if you're able to avoid that 5-hour window, this rate might be great for you to save money, and you know, it'll provide those benefits of reducing the peak demand on our system. So let me go to the next slide. This slide really gets to some of the points that were, I think, kind of fundamental underlying Mark's presentation, is that one of our goals with the time of use rates was to have rates that reflect the cost structure of the electric system. So, again, our flat rates don't give any customers incentives to manage when they use power and how that drives investment in capacity. So having time differentiation in our rates can do that. And it aligns customers' bills with our cost of providing service to them, which promotes fairness and equity between customers, which is one of those long-standing rate design priorities. The second bullet is something that I think is increasingly important these days. The concept of efficient electrification, where electrification of transportation is becoming a big part of goals to reduce carbon emissions and improve environmental outcomes of the energy system, can really be promoted, with time of use rates, where those electric vehicles or other electric end uses that can be charged or utilized overnight when there's excess capacity on the system. We can encourage those by giving those discounts during the off-peak periods and help promote efficient electrification with time of use rates in a cost-effective manner for our customers and in a way that provides those environmental benefits. And just like with electric vehicles that are kind of what I'm getting at with efficient electrification, all manner of new energy related technologies, when they're bounced up against a rate design that reflects the cost structure of the grid, they're more likely to be built in a way that reflects both the costs and the benefits that those new technologies bring to the grid, which it's true that there are both. There are incremental costs and benefits of most of the technologies that we may have customers adopting. And a rate design that's grounded in those cost principles will help, incent the right types of technologies in the right times. So that's another great benefit. And of course, just the ability to shift customers' peak loads out of that peak window has the ability to reduce the need for capacity investment in generation and even transmission and distribution over time. So next slide. I talked a little bit about the ability to help integrate new higher levels of renewables, and Ameren Missouri, just like a lot of utilities in the industry, are working to, to transition our fleet over time to a cleaner and more renewable energy mix. The graph on the right just kind of illustrates with our Smart Savers rate the time periods where the higher and lower prices will be in effect, and how those relate not only to system loads of the customer, but also to the generation of intermittent resources between solar and wind resources. If you look at that 5-hour window that has the 28.2 cent high peak rate, and for context, that compares to our flat rate today is 11 cents. So this is a significant premium during that window to try to discourage consumption in that time. Obviously, that's the highest time of customer load, but it's also a time of notably low, relatively low wind generation and declining output of solar generation. So out in California, we've seen the system reliability issues with trying to meet the ramp of load as solar resources decline and load remains high. To the extent that we can get customers to shift their load, that time of use rate is a partial solution to some of those operational concerns. Also, the more deeply discounted off-peak rate that this rate features, which is the light green shading, the 5.6 cents overnight, aligns well with when there's abundant wind generation. So to the extent that customers can respond to these price signals, we can shift more load to when there's wind available and move some load out of the time when the decline of solar generation can impact the system reliability. So great opportunity with the increasing renewable penetrations that we're going to have to use time of use rates to just take some steps in crafting the load profile to help integrate those better. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to just talk real quickly about how we're engaging our customers with this before I finish up. So, as you know, from Jeff's presentation earlier, we've just installed our first AMI meters. And this illustration just kind of looks at how we're going to be communicating to our customers so they can start to understand how to interact with time of use rates. So as we install the meter 30 days before and at the time of meter installation, customers are going to receive communications that are just meant to start to build some awareness that you're getting this new meter, it has some benefits, there's going to be some rate options available. As we go on a couple weeks after the customer gets a meter, they'll get more educational pieces about new rates are coming, new rates are going to be available to you, and here's what that means. So, and for the longer we go along, we're going to start to provide them with more specific information. So Sarah from staff talked about the idea of doing shadow bills, and through our settlement in that case, where we worked with staff and some other parties to our case, we came up with a system of doing those shadow bills where customers are going to be able to compare what our different rate options would mean for them and their usage profile. So before customers get defaulted to a new time of use rate, which I mentioned earlier, that the evening morning savers will become the default rate 6 months after the AMI meter installation. They're going to get those shadow bills to be able to compare their particular billing results on the various rate options available. And at the 6 month and after point, they'll just get those reminders that you're being moved to a time of use rate. You have other time of use options if you want to avail yourself of them. Or there is, of course, the old flat rate available to those customers who are have a little more trepidation about time varying rates and want kind of the simplicity of that flat rate. So the next slide. And so this is the last slide I have, and basically just a view of the kind of the website that we're using to introduce and educate customers about time of use rates. You'll see across kind of the top of the graphic on the right that it has the various rates listed, and underlined there's a Smart Saver. So this is as if the user on the website has clicked the Smart Saver and wanted to learn more about it. The graphs at the bottom give customers a sense of what power is going to cost different times of day in the different seasons. So you see again that 28-cent peak rate from 2 to 7 p.m. But the mid peak of 8.7 is a significant savings against our flat rate of 11.8. So for 11.8 cents, which is the summer rate on our flat rate. So again, any customer that can shift most of their load out of 2 to 7 p.m. is going to do really well on this rate, and it's going to give them those right incentives to shift that load out of the time period where that can help reduce demand on the system. But this is, some of the information that we'll be sharing with customers and trying to educate them about our new rate structure and make that a positive experience for them and let them know that there's opportunities to save. Jeff mentioned earlier the ways that we've done some customer research to craft this and guide this, and really making a goal of doing rates that do the things that Mark and Sarah talked about to a large degree, about aligning our rates with our cost of providing service, but in a way that customers can actually take advantage of to take control of their energy bills and have better experiences. So that's what I have for you today. I appreciate it, Josh, and I'll turn it back to you and be available when you have questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that. Definitely some great work going on. Following up there is Jeffrey Beeson with Evergy.
Hello, thanks. Really appreciate today. I'm kind of the marketing guy of the group, so a little different presentation on the rates, but my job is really to, once we implemented time of use and had that tariff, how are we going to tell our customers and get them engaged with this? And so I really liked what Mark said at the beginning of his presentation customers need to understand these rates. And so that's really what I've been focusing on, and want to tell you today about how we rolled out time of use. So next slide, please. Go one more. I'll tell you a little bit about our background, and then we have a 3-step marketing approach that really goes into overall awareness, and then educating the customer, and then helping them succeed on the rate. Next slide. So first, on the next slide here, we'll talk about our rate options. We have stipulation and agreement in our Missouri and Kansas territory. And really what we're focused on is that global awareness, making sure all customers know that we have time of use rates, helping those who are interested enroll in them and make sure they understand it. And then also we'll talk about shadow billing as well. Next slide. Our rates look a little bit like this for our Missouri territory, at least. So you can kind of see we have the three-step rate, where 4 to 8 is really our on-peak time. And so just a little background, and that's Monday through Friday, where our weekends don't have the on-peak time. Next slide. So we started off with getting a group of about 80 subject matter experts across our company, and we quickly realized that this is really not only a change for customers, but a whole company change, a whole mindset. There's different things, our systems and our billing were all set for kind of one rate for the most part for residential customers. And so as you give them choice, you really have to think about how that affects all your systems and policies and changes. And so it did take a while for us to get there, and it was a good exercise to kind of undertake. For example, our systems were set up that a rate stays with the premise, it stays with that house. Well, now that a customer is choosing their rate and they may move and want that rate to follow them, how does that change all the systems and billing and IT things to make that possible? And so that's a lot of things that we had to work on to bring TOU. So that's just a little background. On the next slide, as we go into kind of here's that awareness, education, and success I talked about. So I'm going to talk about how we really rolled these out. So first, we did a deep dive into what other utilities were doing at the time, and some things that we really learned that we applied to our rates are, website, as Amron just mentioned. Websites play a really important role in helping customers understand these rates. Graphics are really important. And then focusing on what high use appliances are. Customers didn't necessarily understand what they needed to switch in order to be successful. And so that was another learning. On the next slide, I'll talk about a little bit about the customer research we did and some of those findings. In addition to kind of pure research, we did in-person focus groups, panel surveys, random selected surveys to really try to figure out what customers felt about these rates, how they what kind of information they might need to be successful. And, some of our big learnings were rates feel complicated, and I think in some of the presentations earlier today, it is complicated. We've seen that. And so how do we make this easy to understand with a very simple, clear message? Customers told us, they're used to Googling. They want to research kind of on their own first before they call. And so how can we make sure we have information that kind of goes to that Google first customer base that has now come about. And then again, making sure we're kind of have a cohesive message across our portal and our main website and our customer, our call centers, and kind of making sure that there's kind of that uniform message across. And so taking these learnings, we kind of developed out our campaign, which I'll go into a little more. Next slide. And so our goals were with our campaign, again, was to create awareness in the market, drive that awareness to help people be educated on their rates through information and personalized information, getting them details about their actual usage and how it compares to other rate options. And then finally, if they do change over to the rate, how can we make sure they're successful and they continue to help save money on that rate while they're on it? And so we kind of have this awareness, education, and success journey that we built out for our customers. Next slide. One more. So on the awareness front, really talked about how we could build out messaging to talk about our kind of standard rate and the new rate, and helping people understand which one is right for them. And so just some of the messaging that we kind of went through. Next slide. And we also looked at, what do we call this? So we did actually a lot of research on whether time of use was the right name for this program, and found out that for the most part, it was. Customers did react well to the word time of use. We do use the word plan over rate with customers, but also worked on this kind of additional messaging called switch, shift, and save to help customers understand kind of the 3 steps that they needed to do. Next slide. We also looked at our rate names and did a decent amount of study of what we call these, and went with peak, saver, and super saver as our 3 rate periods. But as we were thinking about, okay, if we're doing advertising on the field, we really only have a few seconds to grab someone's attention and get them more information. And so, trying to explain 4 to 8, and then 6 to 4, and then 8 to 12, and then 12 to 6, you just can't do that, especially on any mass advertising. And so we narrowed that down to this really simple wait till 8 message. And so that's really where our campaign led to, and kind of the messaging we went with at a high level is wait till 8. And that really helped customers understand, kind of what they needed to do and kind of grab their attention. And then we drove them to get more information to really get the details. Next slide. You can see, just like Ameren has multiple rate options, we too are thinking about how we, what are those different options, and how can we kind of package them together. And so really came with this rate portfolio that's kind of timing is everything, and it lists out the different options, who the best customer is for each, or what you may need to do to save on each individual plan. All right, next slide. So on our marketing approach, we wanted it, we went back to that research that we learned. It needed to be simple and needed to connect to the customer. We wanted to build it out in phases. And so we went with a employee launch that started us off before the rate was even live. Then we went with early adopters and some people that we thought could be advocates for the rate, and then moved into mass awareness and enrollment. You'll see we use a mix of mass media and targeted channels, and went with that kind of messaging that's really easy to remember, wait till 8. And hopefully you'll see our creative is pretty bold, noticeable, and easy to understand. Next slide. So here's kind of how the campaign looks when you pull it all together, and I'm going to go through some of our tactics, but we went with this wait till 8 messaging with the clock and a very graphical image that kind of leads our campaign. We talk about saving money as a kind of a main benefit to this rate. And then we give them graphical illustrations to help them understand the details, and really lead with this. When it comes to saving energy, timing is everything, to help them kind of connect why we do this and the importance of it. Next slide. So again, we build momentum. This is kind of our rollout. So we did our employee campaign last summer and got employees really ready so they could answer questions from their friends and neighbors. We then, late in the year of 2019, we rolled out our early adopters phase. And then just in kind of January and this year, our mass campaign, which really got hit by COVID. So that did kind of change things, but we're happy to say it's still successful, and we were able to tweak things as we learned how COVID was affecting customers. Next slide. So on our employee campaign, here's just kind of our strategy. We were also going through our rebrand to Evergy and our merger, and so we really needed to do some tactics to help customers or help employees understand this rate and get through all the other noise of our rebrand and our merger. And so we did some kind of bold tactics that are on the next slide, I believe, if you want to go over. Including elevator wraps throughout our buildings, bathroom window clean. So all of our bathrooms had a clean on the mirror. So when you're washing your hands, you could read the information, understand how the rate works. And then each of our employees got a kind of a card that was twofold. It had one section that they could keep in their desk or their cube, and then another section that folded up into their badge. So when they're out in the field and someone might ask them about this rate and this campaign, they could easily come, pull up the information, know what the hours were, things like that. So a decent sized employee campaign than we might normally do for a new product, but this was so new for employees that we felt like it was important to really educate employees so they could be advocates and supporters to their friends and neighbors. We didn't want employees, saying, "Oh, I don't know what that rate is," and kind of not being a champion. So in our next phase, on the next slide, we focus on those early adopters, those innovators, early adopters, people who are used to technology and changing routines. And so on the next slide, you can see some of the graphics that we used for them. So we did heavily email to this group and kind of tailored each email to the different audience groups. So the EV group got a very tailored message about EV and charging and why it's important. So we had our EV drivers. On some of our tech groups, really focused on kind of the smart thermostat benefits and things like that. So again, very visual emails, very eye-catching, not diving into rates and rate structure and all of that, but trying to stay pretty graphical and educational without getting too bogged down. We would send them to the website to really learn more. Next slide. On our full customer campaign, that's really that next group. So we launched in after we kind of had early adopters. We had, I want to say we had maybe 1,000 early adopters by the time, probably maybe a little bit more. And so we learned a lot from that group. We learned what was working, what enrollment processes needed to change, what we could message better, and really prepared ourselves for the full launch, which happened in late January and continues today. And so on some of the campaigns, on the next slide, I can show some of the items we did for that full campaign. Your traditional things like bill inserts and on our envelopes, but we also did radio ads, a lot of digital social retargeting ads to really mass target this. We don't always do a lot of mass advertising. We usually try to stay pretty targeted, but wanted all customers to understand and know that there's this new rate option out there. And if they're interested, we can help them kind of learn more about it. Next slide. And then, in our kind of fourth phase that we continue to have on the background is that target approach. So, through our research, we identified, groups that we thought would be really interested in this rate. And one of those groups was working adults with no kids. And so, would target additionally those groups, to get them to really sign up and see if they're interested. Next slide. Some of the things we did here is created a new video that we use not only on our web, but on social. We have digital ads throughout, both social ads and kind of banner ads, things like that. And so a new, very visual website too that also helps customers. Next slide. So that was our kind of awareness phase. And next we wanted to talk about the education phase. So we'd spent a lot of time on what tools and information customers would need. So again, as I mentioned, built out new pages. Before our rate pages were not much more than just a link to the tariff. And so we took an approach of looking at all of our rates and adjusting the pages to make them more visual, make them easier to understand, help explain the rates a little better. And so really kind of creating that rate portfolio is what we were looking for. Next slide. And then we also sent each of our customers what we called a rate education report, and they get this twice a year. It's our version of shadow billing. As we looked at many different shadow billing options, what we found is if you just put the rates on the bill, which is one option that many do, it was missing that education part of it. Like, yeah, I can see that I might save on this rate or this rate, but how does it work? Why would I do that? How do I change? And so these reports that are mailed and emailed to every customer twice a year, we felt did a good job of providing that shadow billing knowledge, but then also providing a lot of education to help them understand what this means, how it works, what are tips to save if you do, move to this rate. Frequent questions like why would Evergy even provide this rate? How does it work, to get that kind of grid benefit knowledge in there. We found, these were very popular with our customer base. They really enjoyed them, really drove a lot of good enrollments. And so we're happy with the performance here. So just a little different take on shadow billing for us. Next slide. And then we also put a new tool on our portals that customers could log into to get their personal usage. And so we called our online rate analysis. And so this does analysis on our different rate options and helps the customer understand if one may be better for them based on their past usage. And so we do try to do a lot of education, both on that rate report, the shadow billing report, and this to help customers understand, while this report may not show you would save today, it's because you haven't changed your usage yet. And so that's a big part of the education is, for some people, it's an automatic savings. They don't have to change much of their lifestyle. For others, maybe they're right on that line. And so just doing a few things could really help them start to save. And so this is a good tool that they can drill down to each month to figure out, okay, well, what month was I higher on one plan versus the other, to help them understand that. And then they can easily make the change right in our portal. Next slide. So this is our 3-step change process. So we're really proud that we can offer customers to change their rate right in our portal. It goes effective the next day. So it's a 1-day turnaround, and they get on that rate and kind of shows them all their options. It makes it really easy. I think over 90% of our current enrollments are done online, which is a positive step to show that people found the information, they understood it, and then they were able to enroll pretty easily. So proud to see that. Next slide. And then lastly is kind of the success. So we showed awareness, we got customers enrolled through education, and now we're going to help them succeed. So when a customer enrolls with us on the time of use rate, they get this letter in the mail. It includes a magnet that pulls off that they can stick on their dishwasher, just another reminder to wait till 8. It provides information on the rate and kind of a tear off piece that they could stick on their fridge or somewhere else to remember the hours. So it's really that kind of welcome experience. And also we found it helps customers who maybe their significant other or others in the household didn't realize they went on this rate. It's a good kind of conversation piece that kind of reminds the whole family that you're now on a new rate option and there's some things you need to do. Next slide. We also provide our customers, once they're on this rate, a weekly report that we call a rate coach. And so each week they get a report that shows them how they did that week and compares it to the week before. And it's a really kind of graphical, and we use the different colors to explain the time frames to really help a customer understand how they did last week. And the goal here is to help them be successful, so they don't have to wait till the bill that comes a month later. They can make changes throughout the week and realize, oh, I kind of messed up last week. I need to try to do better this week. And so hopefully that they don't get those big surprises when the bill comes. Next slide. And then we added this hourly usage on our portal as well. And so in addition to the weekly reports, they can go in, and all customers can do this now, to go in and see their usage by hour on our portal, and they can go back to the next day and see that. And so that's been really helpful for all customers, but especially TOU customers. If they're kind of wondering, hey, this bill was a little higher than I thought, they could go back and see, what day that maybe they use a little more, or, making sure they're shifting to the right times. Next slide. And just to recap to finish this up here again, we use this awareness, education, and success kind of journey to move people through the process and help them be successful. A few results on the next slide here to wrap up. Again, mentioned our kind of process and strategy. Next slide. And some results. Currently we really just launched this year, and then COVID hit, but we have over 5,000 enrollments. most of those enrollments are coming through online, which is really great to see. Most of those customers look at those tools that we put in, which we're really excited about. Those rate coach reports are people are opening those about over 70% of the time. So it's a great open rate for emails, showing that those weekly reports are really helpful to TOU customers and hopefully helping them not opt out and go back to their standard rate. Next slide. I think that's just a few. We did a post-enrollment survey and some interviews, and these are some of our findings. I won't go into them all, but some of the proud ones as a marketer is customers remembered that wait till late tagline. They could recall that pretty easily. They remembered getting the marketing materials from Evergy and felt really positive about that. They said it was easy to understand and it was an easy sign-up process. And so, all signs point to some good successes in the rollout so far, and we'll continue to monitor this to see how we do. Next slide. And I think that wraps up for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. We'll go ahead and bring everyone back online. So welcome back, Mark and Sarah, Steve and Jeff, and we will open up for questions. So if you have a chance, go ahead and enter in the chat box or the Q&A portion to ask some questions. But as we wait for those, I did have a couple that I wanted to share. And I can't recall, so I apologize about this, but can you talk about the difference between how time of use will work with, or if it will work at all, for residential versus commercial clients? And we'll go from Steve, Sarah, and then to Jeff, and then to Mark.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, in our most recent rate case, we were really focused on the residential options that we were proposing. We do have some time of use elements in our other rates, but there's also probably going to be some opportunities to look at those in the future to see if there are more appropriate ways. For example, in our settlement in our last rate case, we agreed to look at a rate for our small general service, our small commercial industrial customers that would look similar to one of our residential time of use rates. So we do have, like I said, some kind of legacy historical time of use differential options for all of our rate classes, but our current focus on kind of updating and modernizing those has been on residential today, but we're going to be looking at that going forward, and there may be some opportunities to improve some of those commercial industrial time of use options as well.
Okay. Let's go stick with the utilities, and then we'll switch to the non-utility part. Jeff, any thoughts on the residential versus commercial for you?
Yep, I would echo Steve's comments. We're pretty much the same way. Right now, the focus on residential, but definitely an opportunity for commercial down the road.
Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, very consistent with that. I would note, we noted in our staff report back in that EW docket, and I think it's come up on some RAP presentations as well, that sort of once you control for voltage and line losses and local facilities, that some point down the road, if people have more automated appliances and that sort of thing, we may be looking at something like a continuous rate design where you are just controlling for voltage and customer-sided facilities and that sort of thing, and everyone is really subject to the same rate structure, which takes a lot of the potential inequities out of things.
Okay, interesting. Mark.
No, I mean, yeah, Sarah makes a very good point that we often invoke as a sort of a theoretical future endpoint if we ever get there, that costs are costs, and they're all incurred in a similar way regardless of the type of customer. So customer classes are really a shortcut to get at that, in particularly the way the system used to be 50 years ago. But as you go forward, how you implement that over time, how we transition things, you know, residential customers and small business customers are a little more sensitive to changes and less sophisticated than some larger industrial customers who have energy management professionals. So.
Okay. Jeff, there was a question from Jim. He had asked, he couldn't remember if you said what he had to do. His note was, I failed to note whether the meter on my house must be changed to opt for time of use rates.
Sure, yeah, it does take an AMI meter. Evergy rolled those out a few years ago. So for the most part, we're almost fully deployed with AMI. So for most customers, they don't need a change out at time. That's already happened.
Okay. And we kind of talked about this with AMIs and other stuff, but in general, what has the reception been of the new rate designs, time of use, the installation of the AMI meters, everything within the system that obviously makes, you know, you have to pull one lever to get something else to work. What is, in your perspective, what's been the customer reception of this? And we'll work backwards than we did before. Mark, I'll let you go first.
I mean, I think there's, in most of the country, we're sort of at the opt-in phase. You know, California, a couple smaller utilities and other places are moving toward default. So, you know, generally, if you're opting into a rate, you have the choice, and, you know, to the extent you're unhappy with it, it's a little bit your fault. But, you know, I think we've been going slow, so that I don't think we've had any massive disasters. There have been some places where there's been a customer backlash. You know, one specific instance in New York around restructuring, they moved certain customers to default time varying rates, and the legislature went ahead and said you couldn't do that anymore, and they rolled some of it back. So there's been some backlash, but you know, I think people have been appropriately cautious about it so far. Recently.
Sarah, any thoughts from the Public Service Commission as far as customer reception?
So we've done some research with what the co-ops are actually doing, who have gone to some mandatory time of use rates and some time dependent demand rates. And it sounds like with proper messaging that these are working fairly well. And of course, I'll defer to Steve and Jeffrey on their utility experience.
Great, that's good to know. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard pretty loud and clear that our customers want choice and they want options. And so, you know, we're really happy that we can give them an option to choose from. We're hesitant maybe for mandatory, but we think having one or more options is a really good solution. And what our customers have told us, our opt-out rate once a customer does change the time of use has been really good. So we're happy to see that customers aren't, you know, immediately coming off of it. So far so good, but still early.
Steve.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent it's early for Evergy, it's even earlier for Ameren. You know, we're really just embarking on this. We've had our first meter set in July, and you know, the default process that we talked about with the default mild time of use rate isn't even going to begin until 2021. So we don't have a lot to go on as far as gauging customer receptivity of it. We did do, you know, Jeff Esserman this morning talked about from our smart meter project, we did do a lot of customer focus groups and research and some surveying about it. And I think, you know, we think that there's some great opportunities for enhancing the customer experience. And we certainly expect this to be a positive development for our customers. But in terms of on the ground experience, we just don't really have a lot of feedback until we get a little bit farther along with it.
Makes perfect sense. Well, I don't see any other questions from the community. So at this point, I think that wraps up this session. Steve, Sarah, Jeffrey, Mark, thank you very much for helping us close out our first ever virtual Midwest Energy Policy Series conference. I hope the process and the experience was worthwhile, enjoyable to the dozens of speakers and the over 100 participants that we had. I greatly appreciate, we could not have done this without our speakers, their expertise, their knowledge, and their donation of their time. And as with any event, it should go without saying that without our sponsors that you see here today, we wouldn't have had this either. We'll remind you that this event will be on demand. We will send out a survey. Greatly appreciate you responding to let us know what we can do better, both for this on virtual as well as just in general. A reminder, December 10th will be our next Midwest Energy Policy Series, and that one will be on economic development and the energy sphere. And we look forward to you participating then. We have a surprise that will be partnered with that event as well. More information on that to come. So thank you all very much one more time from both Travis, who has been behind the scenes, the wizard behind the curtain, making sure that everything has gone well, and to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the MEI board, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.